I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Greetings and welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting of November 4th, 2008, a historic election day, and I hope everybody's had a chance to vote, but if you haven't, please do so after this meeting. Please rise to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We seem to have a record small number of consent agenda items. There's just the minutes and correspondence. Nevertheless, if you wish to pull either of these two off, this would be the moment to do so.
Item 1, I was not here on that meeting, so I can't verify the minutes.
All right, Claudino has pulled the minutes off, and we will entertain a motion on the second.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So correspondence has been approved. Now, on the matter of the agenda approval, Claudino will be abstaining.
So move.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? One. That's a 4-0-1. We will now take a recess until 9:10, at which time we'll have public comment, which would be items not on the agenda, 5-minute limit, 15 minutes per topic. Okay, we're back in session, and the item before us is the item 3, public comment. Again, these are for items not on the agenda, expected to last no longer than 5 minutes per person, or total 15 minutes per topic. Please step forward if you're interested in addressing the board on such an item.
Hi, my name is Krista Thompson. I'm with Behavioral Health Services. I'm here for 2 reasons. One, to let the public know that there will be a study session on the new workforce education and training component of the Mental Health Services Act, and that'll be at 1:30 today, I believe.
Yes.
And also, there will be a public hearing on the same topic this afternoon at 4 p.m., and that will be at the Mental Health Board meeting, and that is located at 373 West St. Charles Street, Suite E in San Andreas. That's at the Behavioral Health Services Annex. That's located in the Umpqua Bank Pizza Factory complex there. If anyone has any questions about either of those, they can call me prior to that at 754-2810. I also have a press release to share regarding one of the programs that's part of that plan. This is a time-sensitive program, so we want to make sure that the press is aware of it. We are sponsoring a new Masters of Social Work program that is being taught with a rural mental health emphasis, and there will be a information session held on December 11th at 5:30 p.m. The location is to be determined, but if anyone's interested, they may call me. Again, my number is 754-2810. And again, I have press releases for anyone who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you for your good work on this stuff. It really shows. Anybody else wish to address the board on an item not on the agenda? In that case, we will move to item number 4, discussion and possible action regarding a minute order authorizing board chair to sign a letter addressed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service seeking exclusion from critical habitat designation. This is from our Department of Agriculture, and this is our Commissioner, Mary Mutz.
Good morning. I'm bringing this item forward on behalf of Calaveras County Farm Bureau and Calaveras County Cattlemen's Association. The 2 organizations request the board formally oppose the designation of critical habitat for the California red-legged frog in Calaveras County and submit comments indicating your opposition to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the formal record. A letter opposing the designation, ready for the chair's signature, is included in the packet, and it is addressed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The majority of the board members were present last week at a meeting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and you heard the concerns from the local landowners in the proposed habitat designation. The landowners have concerns over the economic impacts the designation may have on their livelihoods. For example, for certain projects that require a federal permit, the landowners would be required to have a consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and with that, they would need to hire a private wildlife biologist and pay for the cost of that wildlife biologist to do the assessments. The landowners in the area currently engage in practices that support the habitat of the red-legged frog and feel the designation is not necessary. The proposed habitat includes over 4,000 acres in the Valley Springs area, which is bordered by Highway 1226, 26, and Paloma Road. 75% of that acreage is currently restricted by California land conservation contracts, which prevents development in the area and also restricts the land to agricultural uses. So on behalf of the Farm Bureau and the Cattlemen's Association, I'm seeking approval of a minute order authorizing the chair to sign a letter addressed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service seeking exclusion from the designation of critical habitat for the California red-legged frog in Calaveras County.
Thank you. We'll be having comments from the public in a moment. Does the board have any questions to ask of the commissioner at this point? All right, we'll then open this for public comment on item number 4. Would anybody like to address the board?
It's up to
So
you.
they can comment.
Okay.
That's all right.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
let me go if you start having it up with everybody. If you start with Roger.
Actually, Roger, could you take just a moment? Supervisor Callaway has a second draft of a letter and wishes to present it so that people can consider that before public comment begins. So there being 2 drafts in front of us now.
Certainly, sir.
Thank you. I apologize for
I
interruption.
felt like I should make my comments first. I was in the meeting that we had with Fish and Wildlife, and I read the letter that we are sending to them, and I had some concerns about it. I felt it was filled with sort of maze. We should have been more fact-oriented. It had issues on there about the Williamson Act, which really has nothing to do with the designation. The Williamson Act is set up as a tax benefit and to discourage premature and unnecessary conversion of ag land to urban uses. It's on a 10-year process, rotating 10 years, and at any time can be pulled out. There was also at that meeting a couple of very critical things that were mentioned on why we should not have the designation, and those were not in the letter, and I felt it should be in the letter. An example was if you wanted to convert some of your land to vineyards, or as one woman had pointed out, to strawberry growing, and you were in cattle ranching, then you couldn't do that. I thought the fact that you couldn't convert your ag land to another ag use was critical, and yet that wasn't addressed in the letter, and that's a very fact-oriented part of the designation. So I did draft another option letter. I tried to remove what I thought were the maybes, this could happen, that could happen, to deal with some of the facts that occurred in the meeting, some of the facts of the designation itself. I gave it to Steve Kafka, who's, I think, president of the Farm Bureau, and there were a few other copies out there. I guess I would like the ag community to consider this. It's the bottom line is still the same. We didn't really say until the third paragraph that the board felt it unnecessary. When you do a letter, you should tell them right away what it is you think you want or don't want. So I started out saying the board opposes the critical habitat of the California red-legged frog and why. And then I go on. So I would like the Farm Bureau and the Cattlemen's Association to consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Callaway. Roger, please step forward again.
Roger, keep seated for a moment, Roger. Mr. Chairman, I apologize for this late breaking news here, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you. But yesterday, I participated in a meeting with John McCall, the attorney that has been engaged by the county to draft the beginnings of our habitat conservation plan. And we had a very productive meeting with Deborah Lewis and Bob Selman, and we had a conference call with a young woman from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy who is going to help administer the grant. Anyway, during the course of the conversation, John, who is a very capable and talented land use attorney, said, well, he reviewed the letter and he said there are certain elements in this letter that are brilliant. He said he wanted to know who wrote it, and I neglected to ask that, but there were certain aspects of the Fish and Wildlife Service's own methodology that he said that if we were to introduce that into a bullet point, number one, there are 4 bullet points in the existing letter that we got from the Farm Bureau, and he has drafted up a letter that I would like to distribute to you. There's 4.
I can tell this is going to be an interesting editorial experience today. Yes, let's A, send out for lunch, and B, make sure that we're all patient with one another.
Well, I'd like frog legs.
I prefer beef myself.
Well, I'll send it to that.
Anyway, I just want to submit to you that I'm not at all critical of
Another letter.
Supervisor Callaway's editorial style or writing ability. My inclination would be to go with the recommendation of a learned land use attorney. So anyway, I'm just pointing out that we have this yet another alternative.
I'm a learned county supervisor.
She had a little trouble there. She stuttered, didn't she?
The thrust of Mr. McCall's suggestions lie in the fact that the county is well on its way now with the receiving of this $48,000, or I guess it's $46,000 grant to start into this HCP, that we can raise this flag to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, saying that we're entering into this partnership, the potential partnership that will effectively, fit into their rules and methodology, so that it would, on the face of it, make it unnecessary, or not necessary to designate this 4,000 acres. So I think it's a step in the right direction. Thank you for your patience.
All right, and now if there's nobody else who has another iteration of this, I believe it's time for Roger to rise and speak. No, I'm not, but let's try it again, see what happens.
My comments won't be a fifth version, I promise.
Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Roger Prideaux. I'm here today as president of the Calaveras County Chamber of Commerce, representing the Chamber. I have a brief letter here that I will read to you and pass it over to the clerk. It's dated November 4th, addressed to Mr. Walensky, the chairman. Dear Supervisor Walensky, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is proposing to designate, as we know, 4,449 acres of land in Calaveras County is critical habitat for the California red-legged frog. The acreage involved represents land holdings in the Youngs Creek area, north of State Highway 26 and south of Paloma Road. This is the same area as was proposed for critical habitat in 2005, of which we're all familiar with. The Calaveras County Chamber of Commerce is asking the Board of Supervisors to oppose the service's proposal to designate this area as critical habitat. Comments must be submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service by November 17, 2008, and we urge you to send a letter asking the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to exclude this acreage from the habitat. And thank you for your consideration. And what version you use is up to you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board on item 4 on the agenda?
I'll also be brief. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, since there are 3 iterations of the letter...
Please state your name for the record, even though we all... Okay.
My name is Darrell Rusk. I live at 101 Melcher Lane in Valley Springs or Burson. And it's already written. It seems if there's not a problem with time, if there could be an ad hoc committee that would include Supervisors Callaway and Thomas to join with others from the community sometime during the next few days, come back with a revised letter for next Tuesday's, if there's not a critical time problem. If that could be done, it seems like that would be a wise option.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Tuesday.
What's that? Oh,
too late.
excuse me. Actually, there won't be a meeting Tuesday because that is Veterans Day. So we'll need to authorize a group if that is to be our course.
Could it be a
No, actually.
Good morning. My name is Ron Randall, Valley Springs, California. I have some comments that I would like to present here. I didn't realize that all these letters had been written, so I might go over some of this stuff that...
You're not alone, neither did any of us, so
Okay.
we're all starting from the same page here.
Let's see. There are a number of reasons why the county should write a letter in opposition to listing and designation of critical habitat in Cal 1. That's the identification part of what the county that we're talking about here. Some of them are plain, such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service own statements, such as the service encourages in 30 years of implementing, and that actually should say 35, so their data is a little bit older, but it says in 30 years of implementing the Endangered Species Act, the service has found that designation of critical habitat provides little additional protection for most listed species, while preventing the agency from using scarce conservation resources for activities with greater conservation benefits. Why do they say this? Because they know that of the 15 species who recovered, only 2 of them have had critical habitat designated. In almost all cases, recovery of listed species will come through voluntary cooperative partnerships, not regulatory measures such as critical habitat. Habitat is also protected through cooperative measures under the Endangered Species Act, including habitat conservation plans, safe harbor agreements, candidate conservation agreements, and state programs. In addition, voluntary partnership programs such as the Service's private stewardship grants and the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program also restore habitat. Habitat for listed species is provided on many of the Service's national wildlife refuges and state wildlife management areas. They also state that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service believes that a more effective use of our limited staff and funding has been to place imperiled species on the list of the endangered species. They've really been fighting this in court for the last since 1985, when this frog was listed as endangered. Also, Calaveras County has better science than the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has. I believe the frog jump started in 1928, and for 80 years there has never been a red-legged frog entered in competition. I don't know how many frogs are brought to the frog jump each year, but there must be hundreds, maybe thousands. There are 2 teams that collect frogs from our ranch. They come at dark, catch nearly every frog they see, between 30 to 40 per year for one team, using an average of 35 years times 42 years. They have been collecting, that is approximately 1,500 frogs for one team. I wasn't able to make contact with the other team, but assuming their average is approximately the same, 3,000 bullfrogs and 0 red-legged frogs. This site is approximately a half mile from the identified site for the critical habitat. For 80 years of frog jumps, the red-legged frog has been absent. There's been 3 frogs reported in the California Natural Diversity Database in the last 5 years, and the last one was in 2004. We don't even know if these frogs are here. That's really all I have there. I talked to every landowner that is in this critical habitat area, and I made a plaque on this map. And each one of those red dots there represents the landowner who is opposed to the list of red-legged critical habitat. If there was anybody that was for it, I would have put a blue dot on it, but I never talked to anybody that was for it. They've all signed letters that basically state what the statement they signed says: for a number of reasons, I am opposed to the listing of critical habitat in Calaveras County for the red-legged frog. Cal 1, being a property in the proposed area owning assessor parcel numbers such and such, such and such and such and such, totaling a certain number of acres. The chance of me cooperating would be better if critical habitat was not listed or designated by federal rule. We also ask that Cal 1 be excluded under Section 4B2 of the Act or any other section of the Act that would be applicable. These APNs will be plotted on a map identified as Cal 1 APN and submitted under a separate cover. And everybody has signed and dated that. And this is the map that I would like to submit. I would actually like to have 5 copies of this map. It's a lot of work for me. I would like some cooperation from the county. I think that they have the mapping services and stuff, that they could imprint those red dots or the information that is here, and I could forward them to the people who would be interested in this. Maybe some of our legislators, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, that's the first time I've heard our county frog jump described as a science fair, so you're breaking new ground here.
Well, it is. I mean, these people come to collect those frogs, and I don't know how many of them are around here, but the citizens of Calaveras County have collected more frogs in 1 year than the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has in their existence.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board on this topic?
My name's Eloise Fisher, and I'm First Vice President of Calaveras County Farm Bureau, as well as a landowner in the affected area. About half of my ranch is proposed to be put into that critical habitat. I am opposed to it. My place is one of the red dots there. I've signed the letter. The Fish and Wildlife Service states that they excluded Youngs Creek due to cooperation improvements made by one landowner, unquote, and their hope that other landowners would follow suit. Now the service proposes to include this same area because no other landowners have come forward, which, by the way, is not the truth. The designation of critical habitat should only be done because the area contains high-quality habitat, not as a means to coerce landowners to provide and improve habitat. The area proposed does not contain the physical and biological features essential to the conservation of the species. It is much too arid in most of it to provide suitable habitat. The area proposed, Cal 1, is almost entirely private land. Only 7 acres is government land. The service states that the designation is not a ban on use of private land, but this is not exactly so. Quote, routine ranching activities, unquote, are supposed to be compatible, but landowners could not diversify and put in an orchard or vineyard or even till up too much of the land to put in a crop such as grain. We might not even be able to build a house for family members. We haven't had any definitive answers on those statements. Page 53498 of the Federal Register states that the service could require some level of management on their part. Are they going to set standards for levels of grazing that can occur on private land? They didn't give me a definitive answer on that when we were at the session on last Thursday. After the area proposed in 2005 was excluded, I don't believe the service has even returned to the site to see if the California red-legged frog population was increasing or decreasing, if there were any tadpoles or egg masses present. As far as I know, there was only one sighting found in this entire 4,449-acre proposed designation. The affected landowners are overwhelmingly opposed to this designation because it will devalue and limit their use of their private land. I request that the Board of Supervisors oppose the designation as requested by the Farm Bureau and the cattlemen and many of the landowners. And Mary just handed me this draft letter. I guess it's the one that Russ drew up. She wanted me to talk about the Habitat Conservation Plan. I cannot comment on that. I don't know what it entails, whether we would be opposed to it or in favor of it. It's just too soon to know what that entails, and I haven't had a chance to talk to other landowners or members of the Farm Bureau. So I can't really comment on that, but I would also like to comment on the draft letter that was put forth to you first by the Farm Bureau and the cattlemen. It was only a draft and to be included in the packet so we could get on the agenda. Right. And could be very easily subject to revision. So thank you.
Just a quick question. Should there be a committee to work on this designated in this meeting, would you or your organization be willing to participate in that?
I would have to confer with my other directors to make sure of that before I could answer you yes or no positively.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dave Haley, and I'd like to just offer a comment as an experienced developer over many, many years. I was once involved with a community in the Solano County area called Sky Valley. We did our initial studies, site studies, and no red-legged frogs were discovered. This project lasted over many years until completion. During the development of the project, which is now called Hidden Brook, many, many hundreds of red-legged frogs became a viable habitat. And this is due to the way development is now managed with the cooperation, or the coordination, I should say, with environmental community development and government. We create habitats within our communities. And this was an example of no red-legged frogs, and it achieved a habitat for many hundreds of red-legged frogs. I'd just like to offer that, and I do support not designating or restricting any land. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Blakely, and probably several of you know I'm Eloise's daughter. So my family does own acreage in the area that is proposed to be included in this designation. And for the foreseeable future, my brothers and I would like to continue the land use that we are engaging in now, which is grazing cattle. But we wouldn't like to be restricted far into the future. We don't know what our children are going to want to do, or what the economy is going to sometimes force us to do, or the development around us may force us to do. I would like to point out that in the Federal Register, in the public comment section, the Fish and Wildlife Service is particularly seeking comments on whether Cal 1, which is Youngs Creek in Calaveras County, should be excluded. I find this interesting because of all the areas that are proposed. That's only one of the areas that they're particularly seeking public comment on. So I think your action in opposing it would go a long way in helping us out with this. The other thing that I find interesting is in the Federal Register under critical habitat. It says critical habitat is defined in Section 3 of the Act as the species areas within the geographical area occupied by a species at the time that it is listed in accordance with the Act, on which are found those physical or biological features essential to the conservation of the species and that may require special management considerations or protection. I would say at the time this red-legged frog was listed, they didn't exist in Youngs Creek. And if they do now, it's obvious there's no special protection needed or special management if they've shown up since they were listed. I grew up in the area just east of there, and we rented pasture down on Youngs Creek. I never saw the red-legged frog in my life and all the time I've spent there. I was there for 18 years and out checking the cattle. I wasn't in the house all the time. And I've never seen a red-legged frog there. I've never seen a red-legged frog on our place, which is proposed to be in the critical habitat designation. And Section 2 says specific areas outside the geographical area occupied by a species at the time it is listed, upon a determination that such areas are essential for the conservation of the species. Again, I wouldn't say such areas are essential for the conservation of the species if they've shown up since they were listed and they weren't there at the time. I think in this instance, the designation is being used as a sword, which is one of the reasons the Endangered Species Act in a lot of instances is used as a sword, not for conservation of the species. It's not for the good of the species. It's used for other things. And I think this instance is another example of that. I would encourage you to adopt the letter opposing the critical habitat designation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jeff Davidson from Valley Springs, and I wasn't really prepared to come and speak too much about this today, but after seeing the map and hearing the concerns, certainly one of the concerns I have is whether or not we've learned how critical habitat will affect the flood control project on Cosgrove Creek. I certainly think it will have an impact. I know that there's actually several flood control projects needed. One, perhaps there at the Hogan Dam Road location, which we've been working on, and then with also above Valley Springs, in this exact area, I think that there's a need for some more retention facilities up there. And so I would wonder if Fish and Wildlife has given us any indication what listing this as critical habitat will do to the existing Cosgrove Creek projects that we have in the Valley Springs area. Also, another concern I would have is I know some of those properties in that area are currently have planning designations in the existing, although very, very old, Valley Springs Community Plan. Many of those agricultural properties do have R1 designation on them. So I wonder, that are currently being operated as ranches. So I wonder how that will affect those folks who have that added value on their property, and what, if any, compensation they'll be getting if the designation hampers their ability to follow the existing community plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board on this item? Yes, please step forward.
I'm Lori Oliver with the Calaveras County Farm Bureau. I don't own property in the designation or anything, but obviously this is an issue that I've spent a lot of time on working towards and stuff like that. I think it's important that the board understand right now that we feel this letter is critically important. I have a little different view than the property owners. I feel like it's important because I feel like wildlife is asking us to create the documentation that would provide them the avenue to leave it out of habitat designation. We were left out before. That was challenged. We are starting back kind of from ground zero to recreate that documentation. We're asking you guys to write that letter along with all the ranch owners that will be affected and everything else, because we have to create the paper trail that gives them the grounds to be able to consider leaving it out. Without the letter, this will go through. It's very important you guys participate in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Al Segala, Calaveras County Taxpayer Association, and I'd like to urge you to approve the letter, to not have property set aside for the red-legged frog. In my opinion, the red-legged frog issue bears a startling resemblance to the spotted owl. If you remember, the spotted owl almost destroyed our timber industry. In our county, Tuolumne County, and other mountain counties, this has been very, very important. Now that the damage has been done, we can't go to those who are promoting shutting down the logging industry for the spotted owl. We can't ask them to apologize for what they did when it turned out the spotted owl wasn't affected by their operations. We can't go to the environmentalists and ask them to donate money for our school and roads, which we're trying to do, get the federal government to substitute tax money for the money that was earned by the timber industry. Well, this is the spotted owl. We learned a lesson. We found that environmentalism, to a certain extent, is used for ideological purposes. Ideological purposes involve changing our form of society. If the people, socialists, want to change our form of society, it'd be much more honest to just come forward and say this is what we want to do, rather than to use environmentalism as a tool to move us in that direction. It's like a front group. Well, such as it is, that all we can do now is use all the wisdom that we can bear and not repeat the same thing again. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Anybody wish to make a comment on this?
I've made my comments. I think Eloise even brought up two items that are fact, not maybes, that I think should maybe even be in the letter too. I guess I would like to see the letter revised. I think it should be more concise and deal with some of the facts that we have. We should start out right away that we oppose the critical habitat. That's what this action before the board is, and you got to get down into the body of the letter to find that. So, I mean, I'd recommend that the chair work with the Farm Bureau and the Cattlemen's Association, Cattle Association, and, you know, come up with a letter that's clear, concise, has the facts on it, has the issues that were brought up in the meeting last week, and then put it on the, in fact, I'd even move that we authorize the letter, have amendment. I mean, the worst case scenario, in my opinion, is it goes out as written. I'd just like to see it modified to be more pointed in the issues that we have concerns with and that were brought up today and last week. So there you have it.
Other comments?
I'll give my comments. I tend to agree with Marita. We basically have 3 drafts in front of us. Quite frankly, my preference would be the draft that was written by our attorney that's doing the Habitat Conservation Plan. And I think he did a very good job of tying that in to the argument. But my feelings would be take 3 drafts and have staff, Mary, run those 3 drafts by the Cattle Association and the Farm Bureau, and see if they have a preference for one draft over the others, if they wish to do some modification and include something from all the drafts. I don't know. I mean, I think the attorney that looked at it saw the initial draft that was composed by the Farm Bureau and incorporated and expanded upon the arguments on that draft. But as being we do have 3 in front of us and the audience hasn't seen them other than the initial draft, I'm sort of with Marita. Let Mary meet with the respective stakeholders and see which draft they would prefer, or if they'd like to take a draft and modify it. That would be fine with me. But I am very supportive of sending as strong a statement as possible that we are opposed to the designation. So those are my comments.
Other comments?
Yeah,
Supervisor Claudino.
I agree with my colleagues who have made their comments so far, and I just wanted the opportunity to say that I too have written a letter.
That's
just kidding, folks.
For those of you counting, that would be 4.
Yeah, no, just kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding. I did write a letter, but it was in January of 2006, and it seems like we're right back to the same thing. I have to admit, my letter was not perhaps as politically correct or polite as the documents there are before us today for consideration, but it doesn't seem to me like we have gone anything but full circle. And back in 2006, I made mention of the fact that, the original proposal that these people had, meaning the federal agency, was contested by some people that had enough money to contest them down in the Bay Area. And as a result of that lawsuit, which the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service were not successful. They were sued successfully by a group of developers in the Bay Area, is what I'm trying to say. And as a result of that, they reduced their proposed critical habitat designation by a full 80%. And the initial designation did not include Calaveras County. And so, of course, I can't say this with certainty, but it smacks of the idea that, okay, why don't we go find some place where they don't have the resources to mount such a successful legal campaign and pick on a county that perhaps doesn't have the economic resources to fight this. And the reason that I, at that time at least, suspected this is when I looked at the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service's website, and I got this, I'll just tell you this is out of this letter, but it's in quotes. according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, this endangered frog lives, quote, near the sheltered backwaters of ponds, marshes, springs, streams, and reservoirs. Ideal habitat being deep pools with dense stands of overhanging willows and a fringe of cattails. Now, I challenge anyone to go down in this designation and find that habitat. I looked. You folks that live and work down there for years, perhaps generations, maybe you can come up with this, but it doesn't appear to me that this is ideal habitat to start with. The other thing that was verified by the federal fish and wildlife representatives who attended meetings 3 or 4 years ago is that they agreed that there might be a perception of less value for this property for sale when designated as endangered species habitat. That was fully admitted by these people. And I contend that when the buyer of any commodity perceives a lesser value for that commodity, they'll probably make a lesser an offer. So my argument basically is with, from my point of view, the absence of good habitat according to the federal agency's description of that habitat. Apparently the lack of verifiable science, since there was a one-time spotting of 2 or 3 frogs down there and nobody's even been back to look. And of course, at least from what we've been presented, there's a lack of any verifiable analysis of the economic impact. So I'm wondering, I really am wondering how or why they came up with this Young's Creek designation. And I'm strongly against it and very much in favor of a staff and a small group of people putting together the information contained in these letters and sending a very strong message to this federal agency that it is not a good idea to do it here.
Thank you. Any other supervisors' comments? Supervisor Thomas.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about some of the stories and comments that were made on last Thursday's meeting, particularly as they in regards to the Gillum Road fiasco. And if I didn't have any other evidence to base an opinion on, this the gut grinder situation that has existed out there for the last 5 years would be evidence enough for me to say, hell no, let's don't do this. So that's I think we're getting a little bit overly wordy here, but we need to fight this, and we don't need to deal with more bureaucratic nonsense where this little, maybe a non-existent frog is. I liked Al's comments about we should learn something from the spotted owl. So anyway, I'd be happy to also throw in my effort on this committee if possible. So I don't have to be there, but if you could tell me when you're going to be meeting, I'd like to attend.
Supervisor Callaway, did you have additional remarks? Okay, I'll make mine. I appear to be the person who will be signing this letter, so I want to share my issues and concerns with people. First, I want to make sure that the letter is true and accurate. I think it's important that whatever letter we send out has credibility, not just to us, but the people who will be reading it, because that's, of course, the intent of the letter is to influence policy. Secondly, I want to make sure this letter is strategically appropriate. It's not just how we feel about something, but also what the context of comment is. And as near as I can tell, the state agency has given us specific criteria, 3 in fact, and I agree with Supervisor Tryon that the letter from the attorney actually is more strategically appropriate that way. It addresses those 3 issues that were conveyed to us. And I really like Supervisor Callaway's, due to its brevity and direct language. In fact, and let me add the final part of my comment, which I think for me is the most important and least discussed here. The way, my understanding, I also attended the meeting the other day, and the way that we're originally got delisted was at least part in relation to people, to recognition that there were people throughout the corridor that involves the stream, which seems the only, I mean, the arid, I'm pretty sure these frogs don't climb cliffs and, in arid regions, so we're really dealing with a relatively small acreage down the stream and some assorted springs that come up seasonally. So my view of this is that the recognition that there was great stewardship, and I'm familiar with this, it comes into my district. Bill and I share this designated area, and in my view, the people who've been stewarding this land for generations have done a pretty darn good job of it. To me, that's the biggest asset we have in this discussion. I also have talked with at least 3 people who seem to own most of the streamway, and they seem to be perfectly fine with voluntary measures to maintain the stewardship that they've always had out there. Those are the big points, and there's also a tremendous amount of money gathered out there, not in this county, and we've been really slow at receiving it, that is there for voluntary ranchers and others that wish to designate some area of their ranch for conservation purposes. And I think we've been we've been very reactive to what we don't want to see, but we have not capitalized on the options that are there before us that we've actually been exercising all along without receiving the kinds of funds that actually support these things and might very well be able to maintain these ranches for further generations and give incentives toward that. So I'd like to see our letter at least encourage the agencies that we're dealing with, federal, state, or others, to recognize our worthy stewardship, to be willing to contribute toward voluntary measures to maintain that stewardship for those willing, and to get the heck out of the lands that make no sense whatsoever for any amphibian. And I would like to see that at least be part of it, that we be proactive, that we suggest that we do have solutions ourselves, and that we list those as possibilities. So I would hope that would be, that those 3 things, again, true and accurate, strategically appropriate. I'll add the brevity that is suggested by Supervisor Callaway, and adding some proactive approaches so that they see not just that we're resistant, but that we have our own solutions locally that could do a better job than they're suggesting. So the question is, what shall we do?
Okay, I just recommend, because what it says is a letter.
Are you making a motion?
Doesn't say which kind of letter. So, yeah, I just move the minute order as presented before the board. It's to sign a letter.
Right.
And that's it, end of conversation, and
Well, we need to
you
give
will come up
direction.
with
We
a
need to give
letter.
direction to a process that would achieve
I would like to
that.
see it go back to Mary and back to the stakeholders and get their concurrence if
We need to give authority for the board to sign, however.
Yes, but we're giving the authority for Mary to do that, bring it back for the board's chair, or for the chair's signature.
For the
board
chair's
signature.
signature. So it's
And
either
I'll
going to
second
be
Marita's
letter
motion.
1, 2, or 3, or some, or 4, or Bill's, which is 5, so
Well,
it's fine.
what I'm assuming is that we're asking that all of the things that have been put into the record, including Bill's original and other things, be submitted for synthesis through the staff.
Yes.
And I believe that's consistent with the motion. All right.
I have a question.
Certainly.
Because if there's any uncertainty about this process, it'll come to me, so I'll ask it now. If the various interested parties don't totally agree on the content, would it be correct that the board chair the letter will be to the satisfaction of the board chair in light of the comments that have been made today?
Consistent
That's
with the
fine.
wishes of the board.
With a recommendation from Mary as our
Right.
chief staff person.
But that the chair,
Yeah.
the signer would have the final.
That's fine.
Yes.
So I have a question. The date for comments to be made is, I believe, November 17th. Is that a postmark, or do they need to be with the federal agency by the 17th? And so we need to be very specific about our timing here.
Let's agree that this final draft to the satisfaction of the parties will be completed no later than a week from this Friday.
That's fine.
Fine.
Completed and sent.
By the 14th.
And they can even be submitted electronically through this
Okay,
e-portal, which could
so that gives us a little leeway.
get us there.
Okay.
Call for the question.
All right, there's a call for the question. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? It passes on a 5-0 vote. Thank you very much, and thank you for your comments, folks. We're going to take a quick 5-minute recess at the request of one board member. We'll be back in session at 11 after 10.
I don't need to go through. I just wanted this to...
Yes, thank you. Pardon me? Now we turn our attention to item number 5 on the agenda, the much-awaited Local Youthful Offender Rehabilitative Facilities Construction Funding Program. A long-winded version of, and now we bring you Mike Krillitich.
Yeah.
The youthful offender.
Yeah, Mike Krillitich, Chief Probation Officer. It's basically the juvenile side of what we just spent, raised a lot of money and got some money for with the AB 900, the jail part. This is a whole whopping $100 million that the state has available for construction for rehabilitative detention.
How much is that? What did you say?
100 million.
100
versus 900. We always want to spend a lot of money on the tail end of the system. So anyway, this is a little different thing to talk about, doing some early intervention work to maybe eventually reduce some of the need for prison beds or jail beds at later dates. But for the interest of time, one of the things we did, and just so I can get Harry up here, we had contracted with TRG Consulting to do a needs assessment for our bed needs for the next few years. And I'll just turn that to Harry now so we can get his time going. He can tell you about the needs assessment we did. And one thing I will mention is that in the board packet it talked about, we have been talking with Tuolumne County about if we did this, that it would be a nice, desirable project if we went as a regional project. So we have been talking with them. Harry also did their needs assessment. So anyway, I'll give it to Harry.
All right, I assume that you'll be available for questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We have a handout discussion.
My name's Harry Munyon, and I'm the managing principal with TRG Consulting. As the chief said, we did the needs assessment. And we also did the one for Tuolumne, which will be important here in just a minute when you see some numbers. If you take a look at the discussion outline that is being passed out right now, the first point is that you are one of 9 counties, Tuolumne is also, that does not have a juvenile detention facility. We know a lot of the people on the executive steering committee, and we know that's one of the things they're going to look at very closely. So right from the start, you've got something going in your favor. You don't have a detention facility, and they want to see how many of those they can get taken care of. And a number of the counties that do not have detention facilities are not going after them. So you're in good shape from that perspective. If you look at the middle of page 1, you'll see the future bed need table. You don't have a huge need, but there's an advantage to that. And the advantage is that if, as the chief alluded to, if we can get to kids early, you never see them on the adult side. So you save the county and the whole criminal justice system statewide a lot of money if you can keep people, if you can get to them, intervene early, have programs work well, and keep them out of the system. Now, in that regard, even without a juvenile detention facility, your repeat offender rate that your probation department has managed is down at 20.3%. That is unheard of. The repeat offender rate tends to be in the 70 percentile and above. So imagine if you have the one thing you're missing, which is the hammer that sits there in case kids don't follow through with their programs, of having the detention facility, then you'll be that much better off.
Now, to put it in some perspective, you need, in the 2010-2013 time frame, you need 8 beds. Your partner county, Tuolumne County, needs 19. So what that comes out to is a total of a 27-bed immediate need in the 2010 to 2013 time frame. That's covered in a footnote at the bottom of that page. There's also a paragraph at the bottom of the page that talks about the urgent service gap in the juvenile criminal justice system. And this is the language that the grant writer will use because that's one of the things they look for. Obviously, you don't have a facility, so you have no detention space. Worse than that, though, not only is the ability to lease out-of-county beds becoming more and more difficult because the beds just aren't there, but it's becoming more and more expensive. And it's expensive on a number of fronts. It's expensive to lease the beds themselves. Some of them now are up at $125, $150 a day. Plus, it's more expensive to transport because of fuel costs, although we've seen a little bit of relief there recently. So you can see that there are a number of reasons to do this, and still the most important one is the rehabilitation of your county juveniles, because they're your citizens and to a degree you're responsible for them. If you look at the second page, the identified need, now as the chief alluded, we've worked from this county side and from the Tuolumne County side. And the direction that ended up in the needs assessment for both was to do a 40-bed facility. What you see there in Table 2 is how that facility will break down. Single sleeping rooms, there'll be 6 beds. Double sleeping room, 34 beds and 17 double sleeping rooms. No dormitory beds. And then there's a description of what those beds actually consist of. If you look down at the bottom, you'll see the SB 81 summary, which is the funding mechanism for juvenile detention. As the chief said, there's $100 million available this year. The way the Executive Steering Committee has allocated it is medium and large counties get $35 million each. There's a set aside of $30 million for small counties. So that's the pot that your regional facility will be competing for. Now, as we learned on the AB 900 side, you can, because you're a small county, apply for and most likely will receive a reduction in in-kind match. You can apply for the entire in-kind match to be reduced. Now, you have to have a 20% in-kind match, you have to have a 5% cash match. The cash match you can't have reduced. You have to do that. But what it does is if you apply for it, in the AB 900 grant process, we applied for and were successful with a 10% reduction. You can apply for the whole 20% reduction. Where it makes a difference is whether the state pays for 75% of your construction costs, which would be if you had a 20% in-kind match and a 5% cash match, or if you're forgiven your entire in-kind match, then the state pays for 95% of the construction cost. So that's sitting there. Everybody was a little bit nervous about it with AB 900. We didn't know how it would play out with the Executive Steering Committee. In fact, there was some anecdotal information after the process that there was some negativity to applying for it, but it didn't seem to be strong enough to not apply for it. So the question then becomes for you all and your grant writer is how much of it you apply for, whether you do the 10% we did on AB 900 or whether you do the full 20%. And I can tell you some of the other small counties are going to do the full 20%. So that's kind of a decision you all have to make when you get to that point. If you look on that same page at Table 3, you'll see how the grant scoring works and what the maximum points are that are assigned. There's 2 lines I want to point out to you. Number 2, project need. You don't have a facility, so you should score very high on that. And the last one is number 9, regional facility. We know of no other regional facilities going forward right now, so that's worth another 50 points. So those 2 should work well for you. Remember, number 2 is one of the high ones. That's 175 points. The schedule milestones are at the bottom there. The ones to pay attention to are the ones in red. The RFP is already on the street. Proposals are due at CSA on January 6th. You want to look at when you're going to do your Board of Supervisors resolution, because
You want to get that done in time to be sure it goes into CSA. They will do what they refer to as a technical review. That has to be done before you submit the grant. They'll do a formal technical review after, but if you want an informal one, you get that done beforehand. Then on February 24th and February 25th, they've set those days aside for county presentations. As you know from AB 900, the county has to make that presentation. The consultants can't do it for you. If they do it the way they did AB 900, and they probably will, it'll all be done on February 24th. They ran all of them on AB 900 on the first day. Then they finally tell you whether you've got the grant and you move forward. And with that, I believe the Chief and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Questions from the board? We'll also be taking public input as well, so let's start with questions.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Number one, Amador County is pulled out. What is Amador County doing, and what are their alternatives?
You know? I don't know that Amador is doing anything at this point.
That's exactly it. We contacted Amador County to kind of resurrect
the Tri-County agreement?
The Tri-County thing. It was funded before. We were given numerous extensions to make it work. And then unfortunately, for lack of, it was kind of nice that we weren't involved in it. It was some issues between two other counties that kind of kiboshed the whole deal. That's why it would be nice to do that. We contacted them. The chief ran it by their administrative committee and polled some other board members, and they weren't interested.
Okay.
But they are interested in leasing beds on a permanent basis.
Okay. Where would this facility be located?
If we go with Tuolumne, and it happens the way it looks now when we first started talking to them, Tuolumne County is in the process of, they're in the midst of purchasing property behind where Walmart is in Sonora. It'd be in Sonora there. They want to do a whole criminal justice center there. They plan to put a new court, the jail, but the original, or the initial project would be the juvenile hall.
Okay. What I didn't see in here where you estimated what the you said what the match is, but you didn't estimate the capital costs that we would be for, I guess, for building the facility.
You mean the 5%, Tom?
Yeah, well, the 5%. I'd like the total cost, and then right. The 5%.
And actually, Beverly Pryor and Associates, who did the, or Beverly Pryor Architects, who did the original Tri-County project, was retained by Tuolumne to do this again. They're working on that. One thing we discussed is the first year, that I think the thing that scared me, and I know scared Bob and some other people, or the CAO, was the operational costs afterwards. But one of the things that we talked about, if we split the cost the first year, just 50-50, that we shouldn't have to put in for some of the infrastructure costs, that would be burdened by Tuolumne County. I think that probably needs to get in the JPA if we went on with this to, square some of that away. So right now, unfortunately, we don't have those numbers.
I guess the biggest concern, there's two big concerns for me. One is the operational cost, and you're saying we're going to pay $1 million for a year, and they're going to pay $1 million for a year, but they're going to have more beds than we have. And it seems to me there's an A and a B here. Number one is if they have more beds dedicated than we have, it seems to me that they should pay proportionately more. If they have 20 beds and we have 10 beds, then they should be paying 2/3 of the operational costs, not have it split 50-50. And my second question under that is just the overall cost seems staggering to me, that we would have 10 beds for, I guess, 10 juveniles that would be, I guess, incarcerated, for lack of a better term, or the like. And if the cost is truly $1,400,000, that's $140,000 per individual per year. That strikes me as a very staggering amount of money to pay for one person, to have one person at $140,000 a year. And my understanding is that what we really do is we pay we would pay $140,000 for 10 beds, whether they're occupied or not, unless we can lease one out to another county, because the operational costs aren't going to go down because we only have 8 or 9 beds in use rather than 10. So those are my two questions, that it seems disproportionate that we're splitting this 50-50 if they're getting considerably more than 50% of the benefit. And secondly, this just seems like such a high cost per individual or per bed that it seems out of proportion to me, the cost.
And just to address that, or maybe to take some more, is just to go with the money thing at first. We pay now, it depends on where we're at, and costs are going up for everybody. We just found out recently that in Nevada County, where we were paying $90, is now going to be $120 so a day per minor. And we have 4 beds there permanently.
We have those now, Mike?
Pardon me?
We have that now?
Yes. And then, as we speak today, we have 5 kids. At least last night, we had 5 kids detained. So, and that varies. We've had more, we've had less. So we're paying close to that now. The original, we worked out last week, the CAOs of both Tuolumne and Calaveras, the chiefs, our assistant chiefs, met and discussed the preliminary budgets, which I discussed in here. It was staggering, to say the least, in what we did. The original plan at that price, it was actually $2.7 million instead of $2.8 million, so it was a savings. It worked out to about $180 a day per bed in there. So it's still more than what we're paying now, because our high cost is $120. Tuolumne is paying $140 for some of their beds because they don't have permanent contract.
But overall, I think last year, or in this current budget year, we have, 8 beds, and we're paying somewhere between, I heard one number was $300,000, another number was a little over $400,000. So we're basically talking about $1 million a year jump in operating costs, or close thereto, under this proposal, which brings me to my second sort of, not question, I guess just concern. I mean, we just basically committed to a new jail. Everybody agreed that was the highest priority in the county. The operating costs when that jail is completed, that are 100% general fund costs, are estimated to be $2 to $2.5 million. Correct me if I'm
around 2.
Okay, around $2 million more in operating costs. Well, we don't have $2 million a year more, and the sheriff is basically represented, well, we'll meet that because we'll rent beds out to other facilities, and that will offset a large component of that cost. Well, that may or may not be, because there's no guarantee there. And if we ended up with an additional $1 million general fund, and I'm assuming this is all general fund, there's no grants or anything to offset this, on juvenile detention, I mean, we're just way beyond this county's ability to pay. I don't know where we would come up with now $3 million. And later in this agenda, we have behavioral health with some new programs, and they're saying there will be no fiscal impact to the county. But once we start new programs, if state funding goes away, there gets to be an awful lot of pressure to not cut programs. And so who knows what this board or a future board would do with that pressure, and we don't have anything built in for any, cost of living advances, and we're probably going to go 2 or 3 years, and then the union's going to rise up and say, my God, we've gone 3 or 4 years, and we want a generous settlement. Where is that money come? I'm just worried about the general fund. I'm worried about the commitments we're making. I don't mind. Here, I think what you're asking is to continue discussions, and I don't mind continuing discussions, finding out how it works and stuff. But all I'm saying is, for my vote, I am very, very concerned about the general fund commitment we currently have in place, because I don't know where the $2 million comes from for the jail, and I'm not totally convinced we're going to lease jail beds out for $2 million a year. I'm not so sure we won't fill them ourselves, and our operating costs will exceed $2 million. And so I'm just very concerned about the operational costs. I mean, we can come up with a 5% match and get grants to build all this, just like we did for the jail, and then here we are. Now what do we do? So that's my concern. I would like to know that, I'd like some comfort that we have the financial ability to operate these facilities once they're built.
Well, and I think and I absolutely agree with you, and it's unfortunate that this opportunity to resurrect this system that we had talked about 10 years ago, it's that hindsight, because we should have built it when it was going to cost $5.5 million, but we didn't. So anyway, it's sad that the world economy has just pretty much crashed.
Yes.
At this time, and the sad part is the ability for families to actually participate in the, it sounds terrible, to participate in the detention of their minor. But it is. We do have a problem that we're hours away where kids aren't visited by their parents. They don't participate in treatment. So what's that worth? What is that worth? $1 million, $4 million, whatever it is, like I said, staggering. So what we did last week is we decided to go back to the budget lines, and one we had talked about and met with prior architects had talked about, do you put a kitchen in the facility? So that $2.some million was 2.7 that we had come up with, was with a kitchen, with cooks, and with 40 beds. We are going back now and looking at how can we cut that back. Do we build less beds, and do we just see if the jail over there can accommodate the meals? Because there are some issues with meals, because kids is a whole different calorie, nutritional balance, and you can't serve the jail meal to the kids. So how do we do that? But I think that's some things to look at.
Administrator Lawton.
Just one question, Mike. I know this came up in our discussions, the meeting you referred to with Craig Pedro and your counterparts with Twelmy. Can you talk to us a little bit about the 40-bed size of the facility as proposed versus the breakpoints and staffing, and what is an efficient size as far as staffing that facility? Is it 30-bed cutoff? And should we be talking about 30 versus 60 rather than 40?
From a staffing perspective, there are two efficiencies you try to achieve. One is staffing, and the other one is construction in terms of one shower per 10 people and that sort of thing.
I would say, Harry, that we're not paying the bill so much for the construction as we are the staffing.
Well, but in either case, you're looking, your most efficient size is 30. Your 30 modules, so 30, 60, 90, that sort of thing. So 30, yes, is much more efficient.
Okay.
Particularly when you're going over by 10 on the staffing.
Thank you.
All right. Bill, you had a question?
Well, I'm just curious. I agree with the concerns of Supervisor Tryon, but I'm wondering, back to this efficiencies on page 2, table 2, I don't know if there's a reason why the dormitory style is not something that you're considering at this point. Is it not cheaper per bed? If it is, why would we not go that direction or consider that?
Supervisor, what it comes down to is operating philosophy of the people that have to operate it. We have literally seen maximum security inmates held in dormitories, and it works, but it depends on the operators. In this case, the operators, being Tuolumne County, were very much opposed to dormitories. Most of the facilities we do, and we design in a lot of these, do have dormitories. Because, as you know, when you've got a population that gets above, or even at 10, you're going to have different security levels. And you've got people, we did Trinity's facility, and it's 24 beds, and it has dorms, and it has double sleeping rooms. It just depends on the operating philosophy of the person. Yes, it is less expensive to build dormitories, obviously. Because your plumbing runs, your mechanical systems, and so on make it less expensive. But we discussed it at some length, and at one point we were in a position where it was all going to be single sleeping rooms, which philosophically, depending on where you're coming from, can be a disaster with kids, because kids are social animals, and if they don't have the ability to socialize for most of their day, it's normally not a good thing. Well, it ended up being as you see doubles and singles. But, you know, it's an operational philosophy issue.
Other supervisors, questions, comments?
Yes, I do, Michael.
You can write a letter. It's okay.
I can write a letter. I can do that. Isn't part of the offset, didn't we, or aren't we not eligible for some state funding for the education portion?
Yeah, and
that would go to the operating costs? So this doesn't include that, I'm assuming.
No, it doesn't, because it really wouldn't go to the operational cost. It would just, the education will go to the operations cost of the education programming, which
Okay.
would be the County Office of Ed in Tuolumne, or if it ended up being here.
That's included in whatever we pay now to take the kids to some other place. It's that other place is getting the same state, so
Correct.
there's no difference. It's accounted for in both rates.
Okay.
Excuse me, there is some funding that comes back. There's schools, there's some school lunch money, there's milk program, and it doesn't amount to a lot of money, but it does go towards
One, I do agree with Supervisor Tryon about the 2/3, 1/3, or whatever that split is. And I'm really having a hard time with the $1.4 million for the same reasons as Tom had mentioned. I also know that there's no such thing as a permanent contract, that we have a contract with Nevada County for 4 beds for a given period of time. We had it with Stockton, and when the contract was up, Stockton said we can no longer use Stockton. In 10 years or 5 years or whenever that contract is up, Nevada County can say the same thing to us. I truly, truly support the concept of a regional juvenile facility. I think it is in the best interest of the kids of Calaveras County and the families for them to be geographically close to the county. I'm also assuming we can resurrect, since Beverly Pryor's firm's doing some work, we can resurrect some of the things that we did 10 years ago and saving some costs, but as was mentioned, that's just upfront costs. That is not operational costs. I do think you have to look at what we can do, like the kitchen, those things that I think you're already looking at. We looked at them last time. And it really hurts me to say this, I cannot support $1.4 million for the county, for this, again, the same reasons Tom talked about. But the other concern I have is on December 2nd, we have to have a Board of Supervisors approval. I'm not clear on what that is, Harry. I mean, is it saying that we want to go forth with it? Are we going to be committing to it? And if so, then that means we have to come up with a resolution prior to that. I mean, I don't mean resolution, capital R.
Theoretically, you don't have to have your resolution done until you submit the grant on January 6th. That schedule was written so that your resolution was written for 2 reasons. One, so that your resolution, in case there were questions, there was a little bit of leeway there, so that you didn't have to, if you want something changed. But it was also written to get the resolution through the informal technical review process at CSA. You don't have to have your resolution, and as you know, in both cases, both boards will have to have a resolution that follows exactly what the grant language says. If you try to change it much,
No, I'm not saying that we change it. I was just looking at the dates that we had.
That's why those dates are in there.
This is one of those issues that on the short-term basis for the county of Calaveras, we cannot afford this. On a long-term basis, we have to do this. So when we talk about 1.4 or some permutation of that, are we talking about what that's going to be in 2013 when the facility opens? Or is that today's dollars and we can look for an escalation?
And that we haven't even got to the projection, because when we did the initial thing that we just met last week, it was like the air was sucked out of the room for a few minutes. So we're looking back at to cut it down. Just to give you an idea on the looking back at the, if we had built it 10 years ago, right now, based on what the projections were then, the facility would have been at close to $2 million a year to run.
But that was for 3 counties, or even
that was 60 beds, but then that was also not, I mean, labor has taken jump. There's been a lot of extra jumps in labor and all that weren't anticipated in that. But so it's close, but not quite the cigar for this new thing. It's a little more expensive now for less, but staffing and then medical issues are what really are affecting that cost.
But in terms of the medical, we don't have to have, or do we have to have on-site 24-hour-a-day medical?
No, we don't have to have 24-hour-a-day medical.
So, but when we contract with Nevada or whomever, we pay for the medical on top of the $120 a day. That's included in the $120 a day? Okay, well, I really support the Missouri model. I don't really like what we do in California for juveniles anyway. And, I had the same question Bill did about dorms, but does Tuolumne get the total say in that? If we're going to be a regional facility, do we not get some say that maybe there'd be a dorm system?
Well, and I think part of it is from the discussions we had. They were number one, kind of set on what they were interested in doing. Number two is looking at it. If it was 40, now we're looking at 30 for some of the efficiencies. It has to do with how do you put it? That in the future, and with the severity of some of the crime that's going on, with the growth, and there's good and bad to the bad economy. Our growth isn't going to be chasing us anytime soon. Unfortunately, maybe. But because of the economy, that's just not happening. But at the same time, it's a lot easier to get those harder beds now and I think most of you know me, I'm not into the whole lock 'em up thing. If you could see how we work now to have what Harry talked about, to have a 20% or 23%.
20.3.
Oh, 20.3. There you go. That's amazing. And that's only because of staff. I mean, because what they do. So down the road, do we get dorms? If there was any building, yeah, I'd, almost demand it. But I think right now, if somebody else would pay for the construction, probably better to have somebody pay for the construction that was more costly than less.
So the only positive thing we're losing is the programs. I mean, all the programs that you listed. I mean, the tutoring, the anger management, the things that we have control over, we lose when we send them out of county.
That's true.
That's what we're losing. And what price tag do we want to pay for the things that we then have control over as a county?
When you send them great distances, too, you're losing any family participation.
Right.
And that's more critical in the programs, probably.
I mean, I understand that. I have to, again, go back to what Tom said. I mean, we're looking at $1 to $2 million for the jail in 2 years for operational costs, and then come 2013, 1.4 or less if you can make it happen.
Yes. And I think we could probably come, even if you looked at the 2/3, 1/3, based on the numbers I gave there, that puts us at about $800,000. We're spending between 3 and 4 now.
I mean, by 2013, we'll probably be spending close to $800,000, if there's even any bids available.
Yeah,
Close.
there are, yeah.
Okay. This is, okay, thank you, Mike, thank you, Harry.
Supervisor Thomas?
Well, I don't want to belabor this very much here, but it just strikes me as being peculiar that if we're looking at upwards of a 200-bed facility that is projected to cost us operating monies $2 million a year, it's inconceivable to me that a 40-bed facility, that the operating costs, our share, would be $1.4 million.
Well, I think that, and not, I haven't studied the jail budget, but I think from what I remember, the discussion was it's $2 million more than what we're paying now, unless. So it's whatever we're paying to run the jail now plus $2 million.
We need to do apples to apples comparisons here. It's the difference between what we're spending now and what would be projected at this point.
Okay.
And then the other thing is minors require more supervision, and it's not. Thank God it's not a jail. Although some people might think locking kids up, that's how they're going to learn. But the unfortunate part is over the years, because we've done a good job with as immediate intervention as we can, and with spending a lot of time with families before we have to send them away. In one way, by doing a good job, now it's like, well, you don't need that. But I can't say we can't think for the future. We have to think in the future tense for somebody we tried before. We're 10 years behind the curve now. It's with but the money staggering.
Okay. Well, I have no other comments.
All right. I have a few.
I have additional comments.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
And if I can interrupt just for a second, there are also some members I know from our Juvenile Justice Commission that may want to.
I guess one of the
take public comment after.
sort of frustrations I have is that we're not getting all of this at one time. I mean, we get the jail because that's when the grant application has to be done, and then we get after this we get behavioral health. It seems to me if we had to prioritize, or if I had to prioritize, I would say, well, let's fund, behavioral health, because I suspect a lot that are incarcerated do have some behavioral health problems. Otherwise, they wouldn't be incarcerated, most likely. And then you have probation, which tries to keep them out of incarceration, and we have a very good rate. If it's 70 statewide, I never can say the term, recidivism or whatever.
Recidivism.
Yeah,
just say rearrest.
For some reason, I have to go home and practice that at some point, because I never can say it right. Where they get reincarcerated, for lack of a better term, and we're at 20%. That's great, and it's too bad that all of this couldn't come in one package, so we could make a decision as to how to prioritize between them. But we didn't, and I think what you're hearing, at least from Marita and I, is that we're very concerned about the commitment of the general fund, and it's a limited amount of money, and you have to stop someplace. And maybe what we should do is take a look at the maybe I shouldn't say this, but this doesn't get aired till after the polls close. But maybe we should look at the jail bond we have, and maybe we can scale that back in some way to the point where we can incorporate yours in some scaled back version and sort of get both, as opposed to just saying one. And I don't know that. I mean, we talked when we didn't think we were going to get the full state funding. We were talking about, well, maybe we'll do a 100-bed facility instead of, what is it, 140?
It's 160-bed minimum to get the state money, and we are proposing to build to 240 to get the additional rental revenue.
Okay, well, we're 53 or 4 now, and maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think you need to work with the administrative office, and the administrative office needs to take a look at all of these grants, et cetera, and see if there's some way we can modify them so that we can have a prioritization that includes the entire sort of criminal justice hierarchy. But to me, it seems to me to be a higher priority to try to catch somebody sooner and younger and get them out of the system than to just incarcerate them as an adult. And I think that is a priority makes sense. But it seems the way that this is coming to us is that the adult incarceration comes first, and now juvenile, and then we'll look at environmental health, and then we'll go on down the system, where we should have started with trying to get the diversions as low in the system as possible, and then you get sort of the incorrigibles that end up being incarcerated as adults. And it seems to me we're not sort of doing that. I find that to be a frustration. I don't blame that on any staff. That's just happens to be the way the state prioritizes it and the way the state grants came to us. So anyway, that's sort of a philosophical statement, and I don't know whether there's something more the administrative office can do in looking at all of this to basically make it such that the general fund costs for the system, and we do the best we can for the entire system, but the general fund cost has to be something that we can incorporate within our financial means. So that completes my.
And just to give you an idea, I don't know if I think it's, number one, too late, and probably not a good idea to reduce the size of the jail. But at the same time, we're a little bit ahead, quite a bit ahead of Tuolumne and land, and designing, and they all just got funded for part of their jail program, and they didn't necessarily want it in this first round. So that's made some kind of tense situation, so to speak, over there and how they're going to deal with it. But one of the things that could be used, whether that jail was built or here, is to share the kitchen, which would be an idea. We just have to do that. So I think there could be some wonderful savings. Or do we just drop back, and it might be kind of too late, but talking to one of the consultants that I know that's standing close to me, that maybe something could be done if we decide not to do regional and we just did something here. You could do something small and build it, but it might be too late. I just keep going back that even if it's a small facility. I remember when I had talked to Glenn County, they built a small juvenile hall, and I think they got up to 12 beds. It might be 20 when they added on. They were spending over $1 million a year to run that. So it's kind of like you're going to spend close to $1 million just to operate that, because you got staffing, medical, food, maintenance. So it's just, it's bad time.
Supervisor Callaway,
I
did
want
you
to
have a
correct
remark?
Supervisor Tryon. The issue before us this afternoon on mental health is not general fund money.
Okay.
I
see that it says there's no general fund cost.
That's right. That's real important.
I have some- I
Staff
have
put
some-
that
I have
in.
some-
That
some
is not general
questions
fund money.
when that comes, however.
But, I don't, okay, so I needed just to clarify that for the supervisor. It's one thing off the table. Go ahead, Steve.
I have a comment or two as well, but before making it, I did want to recognize in our audience that we have a very revered figure in the juvenile justice system. Alan Breed is among us, and I just wanted to acknowledge your presence here. You've really made tremendous contributions in this area, and it's an honor to have you here. I share with Supervisor Tryon some concerns about our basic approach to justice in general. We keep saying we're fiscally conservative, and yet we keep on spending enormous amounts of money in places that don't really have the kind of impact that we desire. If the goal is a safe and healthy community, we studied a little bit more than 3 years ago, our allocations toward meth. We had, at the time, as I recall, less than $150,000 for prevention and education per year. We had about $1.2 million for rehab and recovery. And we had somewhere between $12 and $14 million a year at interdiction, prosecution, and incarceration. If you were really to look at how that's working out as a fiscal matter, let alone a social and economic impact matter, that's really not the ratio that most people think gets the cycle broken. The same can be said about our treatments, in the adult and juvenile justice system. And what I find lacking in the debate, and I would ask that if these statistics, which I believe are out there, could be brought to the board, we might be able to take a better and more comprehensive look at this. For instance, what's the ratio when we talk about an allocation for dollars for staff at this level? What impact does it have on the need for staff in an adult incarceration facility? There are relationships, and what I want to do is when we take a look at this comprehensively, if we ever have that opportunity, because I don't like the rollout any more than the other supervisor just spoke of. I think this is a backward approach, and that we wind up with fait accompli, where we wind up saying, well, gee, we can't afford this because we've already spent and committed to something else. But what's the effect, and what's the science show? I don't want to talk ideology. I don't want to talk philosophy. What I'd like to do is take a look at what's happened elsewhere and what the real relationship between how we deal with juvenile justice and what the ultimate costs, one way or another, are on the rest of our adult justice system. Let me give you my philosophy, since we don't have the full science before us. But it's my take that how we treat our kids has a huge effect on how much we spend on adult measures. And that this is a profound discussion that needs a much greater, it's not, we're too linear. We've got this line item in front of us. Yeah, we can't afford it. And yet we can't afford to not do it. So what's the real cost benefit? And I've visited Oakendale, for instance, and in terms of the facilities, and I think that it's clear that all kids aren't the same, and that they have different levels of autonomy and interaction or capability of productive interaction, and that maybe some kind of mixed housing makes sense, that there is a potential for individual housing and a potential for dorm situations, and something in between, which I find to be even more interesting, which is the kids that do well at Oakendale wind up, and this is not a detention facility, and I understand the difference, but the kids who do well wind up in a more independent and perhaps less supervised facility, and that's the most successful in terms of transitioning people back out into the world. I don't think a one-size-fits-all works with any human being or group of human beings, but for kids in particular, for juveniles, this might, if this approach, I don't know whether it's possible. It may be too late, and maybe we're all trying to win a triathlon in a straitjacket here, but my hope would be that we could do some savings by having different types of construction. Tuolumne probably doesn't agree with that. I would guess they're pretty much developed in their thoughts, but if we could possibly weigh in with some counter concepts, I think we could save a lot in the construction costs. Secondly, on staffing, I agree wholeheartedly that if we're only half or one-third, I should say, of the total numbers, I sure wouldn't want to pay half the ongoing costs for staffing. I also have concerns that if the facility is in Tuolumne, that the hiring is going to be in Tuolumne, and this becomes another function. We'll be discussing this, I think, in the next agenda item. But we continue to export our economy, and other people receive the jobs and the economic benefits from a variety of activities, and we wind up exporting our cash to other destinations. In particular, by the way, Tuolumne. So my hope is that we won't, that we'll retain some ability to hire and place wherever this is done and pay the proportional cost for that rather than some artificial pre-agreed agreement. I'd rather pay for actual costs than theoretical ones. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, just to give you an idea of why it's all come at once, this whole thing started, well, many years ago by not doing a good job with the state of California, not to cap on our potential partners for this reentry facility, but generally, and I think there's somebody in the audience here who can talk about some of that, there were some good things that weren't happening, at the California Youth Authority. And it started in Amador County where two young men hung themselves on the same sheet one night. That started a lawsuit that went on. And so as time gone on, that we've also, that same people that filed that lawsuit also have now done the Coleman-Plata lawsuit, which is the state one, which was, what was a result of those two lawsuits was the money for SB 81 and the money for AB 900. And now, just to give you an idea of what happens when you don't do good intervention and prevention early, and you let things get out of hand like they did in CDC and then became CDCR, was you have a federal court that is standing up and saying, we need another $8 billion just to take care of medical and psychological services. That is what's hurting us. And so what's our part of that? Our part of that has been we try to keep our kids at home as long as we can. We have a lower 18 to 25-year-old adult population in most counties that are on probation, but it's still fairly high. But that's why it all came at once. And then I just don't want you to forget the one thing, that the reason why it's probably harder beds, which I failed to mention before, we can no longer use the youth authority for certain offenses that they have to stay home. So we would need, and that some of those offenses are very serious crimes that would.
All right, well, that pretty much concludes my comments. I just want to pay very careful attention to real science and stop the abstract argument. If it's true that dealing up front with this population saves X down the road, I want to know what that figure is, and I want to know what kinds of studies confirm that. If we don't have that, what the heck are we talking about? You know, we really need to get this clear.
Anyway, I know Harry has to get going about 10 minutes ago, so if anybody has any questions for him, then if not, he could go, and then if we could open it for public comment.
Any other questions from the board? All right, well, we'll now open it up for public input, and I hope the very knowledgeable people present will share their experience with us. Or not. Any other speakers on this topic?
It looked like I wouldn't have to speak. Alan Breed. I'm with the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commission of Calaveras County. Having said all of that, I have to give a disclaimer, and that is that I'm not representing the commission this morning. The commission has not had the opportunity to review this need assessment yet, so we're not in a position, and maybe that's why several of the members that are here didn't get up when you called for public opinion. Well, if that's true, why am I speaking? I came first to Calaveras County in 1946. At that time, the county had a half-time probation officer, only one. And since that time, it has grown, and under the leadership of your chief probation officer now, is recognized as probably one of the better small probation departments in the state. Not only the probation department to be commended for that, but the board of supervisors and the past boards of supervisors that have been supportive and provided the resources. The second reason I speak, though, is that, and I hesitated to come forward, but I have some 60 more years of hopefully committed service to the corrections field. And I couldn't sit back and say, well, somebody else ought to get up and talk about it. Because I think there is some things from experience that we can learn that will be helpful with the problems that we've got to face today. One of the things that I want clearly understood is that I have no objection whatsoever to Calaveras County having a juvenile hall. I would have advocated that 25, 30 years ago, even with the small population you had. Because there are times when kids are so out of control that they need to be temporarily detained until the court and probation can make decisions about what would be best for that youth. You haven't had that, and you've had to use other counties. Probably the worst experience was in San Joaquin County because you brought relatively non-delinquent kids into contact with urban-style delinquency at its worst. And that happens in juvenile halls when you use other people's programs. The thing that concerned me, the reason I really want to speak out on it, is I wasn't sure what this assessment, needs assessment, was to be. Was the board today expected to either approve it and say go ahead and do it? Or is this just merely a very early stage in thinking through the possibilities? And in the just few minutes that I've taken, I just reviewed the needs assessment, and I am very concerned about it as a document at the present time. First, it doesn't speak in any way to the organizational structure of how Tuolumne County and Calaveras County are going to work together to operate a juvenile facility. You have to have a very clear understanding of what that means. I would have hoped if they brought a needs assessment in, they would have brought one that it was a joint document coming from Tuolumne County and your county saying this is what we're going to do together. Such questions about who owns the building after you build it, who makes the policies and procedures for it, who manages the facility, and then who is going to mediate the differences. To my knowledge, there's only one example in California where two counties came together, and that was nearly 45, 50 years ago. It was a constant battle between those two counties about some of the kinds of things that I've just mentioned. And although it's operating yet today, they have learned a lot of lessons that ought to be a part of the process of making a decision on your part of whether you want to go through that very laborious kind of experience. Certainly before you as decision makers make that decision, you ought to have clearly outlined for you what the process of that structure is going to be. Secondly, in the needs assessment, as I review it, it's somewhat simplistic in that it spends most of its time just looking at what might be the population for the next few years. And that was done carefully, but it doesn't do what needs to be done, is to also look at the alternatives to the juvenile facility. Now, if you start with the premise that we're going to have a juvenile facility, then all the needs assessment builds around under that. And that's the first step of a needs assessment. The second step has to be looking carefully at every single alternative. And I see nothing in the document that now reviews that. Third, I'm very concerned about the classification process, although mentioned, is built entirely on a security basis. That's the way classification has been done for the last 50 years in the juvenile field. Just looking at security, is it going to run away? But you now, and it's been mentioned earlier, under SB 81, are going to work with all of the kids that used to go to the youth authority. And even though the fact you haven't sent many to the youth authority for a number of years, looking at the population, listening to the sheriff, and looking at the problems within this county, you're building up a clientele out there that are going to need something more than just probation straight. So you're going to have some kind of classification, and if you're going to be doing something besides just detaining, then you've got to have classification process that speaks to treatment as well as security. There's no effort, as far as I can see. The classification will decide not only who goes into this place, But once he's in there, what kinds of programs are going to be developed for his needs? That has not been presented to you yet at this time. I feel that the staffing, and as I listened to the discussion this morning, I'm probably more concerned about that than anything else, that it only really says that we're going to do what Title 15 says. Well, Title 15 is very, very nebulous in what it says you have to do. But staffing is the determinant of whether you're going to have a program that's worthwhile. I was very concerned about the fact the statement is that we're going to develop the staffing, and that will speak to what kind of a facility we're going to design. It's got to be the other way around. You try to figure out what it is that you want it in the way of a design, and then you're going to have to staff it so that it meets both security and treatment needs. The last thing seems to me perhaps most important. The needs assessment, and I think Mr. Trine certainly mentioned it, this needs assessment must address very clearly what it's going to cost to build. I don't think you should consider what it was going to cost to build 5 years ago when you're talking about a tri-county program and then make some kind of an estimate from it. You've got to know what it's going to cost, the best ability that you have now predicting. Secondly, what's it going to cost to staff? And we're not just talking about security people, you're talking about treatment, so you're talking about counselors, psychologists, social workers, at least consultant psychiatrists. All these kinds of services has to be figured in the basic cost of the facility. Then I'm amazed that Calaveras County appears they're going to share 50-50 the cost of operation when they only have a third of the beds occupied. And that has to be addressed. And then you need, I would say, as decision makers, to know the cost per youth in that program per month for services as compared to what it is you're doing right now. That will probably tell you more about whether you are able to do it or you aren't able to do it. Lastly, I do have to say this. I hope you'll be very aware, and it shows my lack of faith in the state of California's government at this juncture, that SB 81 was not designed philosophically so that we could treat kids better in California. It was designed for only one purpose, and that was to save money. It's just another example of where you turn over the responsibility for an operation that the state historically has had for over 100 years and say to all the counties, not just LA who might be able to do it, but just medium counties and small counties, suddenly say, you're going to do it now, and we're going to give you all kinds of money. Except if you were to start this program right now, they wouldn't give you one bit of money for operating the programs. They might give you a little money by enticing you to go ahead and build this place, but they won't give you any money at all. So you're faced with tremendous costs that you've never had. And even greater problems, as far as I can see it, is that the state isn't going to even give that money that they said they were going to give if things continue to be as difficult economically as they are right today in California. Let me give you two quick examples. When I was director of the California Youth Authority, we charged $25 a month for a kid to be in the Youth Authority. That's all, $25. Then it went up higher, got higher, and here, not but a few years ago, it was getting up to where if you wanted to send somebody to the Youth Authority, it was going to cost you thousands of dollars a month. That's a typical way the state operates the field of correction. Second in is the best program in terms of doing what was needed, and SB 81 might be a part of it, was a probation subsidy program, where you were rewarded for the kinds of kids that you used to send. You kept them in programs in the community. The state gave you money. And the legislation called for the fact that every year the director of the Department of Finance, the director of the Youth Authority, would look at the cost of living operations for each institution and up that figure so that the counties would never have to bear the increased costs. What happened? As soon as the program was going and going well, the state changed the game and took away the probation subsidy program to the counties. Well, what I'm really saying is that you as a decision maker, you've got to have the information that would be helpful for you making a critical decision. And I don't think the needs assessment as you currently have it is a satisfactory document in order to make that decision. But I would urge you to do everything possible to find out whether or not that can be strengthened, that need assessment, and brought back to you in a form that will allow you to support the program, increased regional treatment. Thank you for letting me take the time.
Thank you, Mr. Breed. Other comments? Final word from the department?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Amazing.
I know, and that was all from a, 2-minute read?
Yeah. And just to help Alan out a little bit, and also just talk, the next step in this, the needs assessment is to just look at, do you need beds, how many, and what it is. And I won't comment on the quality of it or whatever, or how we got to that, but so we have what we have. The next step, there's two things that have to be done, and one is the application, which discusses a lot of that. And in the application for the process, they call it architectural programming, and that talks about how you would design this facility and what kind of programming there is. So we've been working with Beverly Pryor Architects and sending them, numerous documents about the programs we do now, what we would do in the facility, and all that. They're alluded to in the needs assessment, but they're going to be specific in this in the grant application. We're going through with that just because a few months ago, or actually a month ago, the CAO made the decision to. It was I don't want to say it's a bargain price, but based on where Marita talked about that, since Beverly did project 10 years ago, can some of this stuff be? And I don't want to say it's reused, but she's very familiar with where we're at. So we've given her information on what we're doing that works, also given her some information on stuff that probably hasn't worked, and going there. So we can have that document, whether we apply or not, we're going to have that document. So that would at least give you some more information. So that is being worked on.
I see in your recommendations that you're asking for to direct staff to continue the review, and I think Supervisor Tryon spoke to that. And I wonder if there's any objections on the board to following that recommendation, asking you to flesh it out. There's been a number of comments about information that we might want to add and ways to strengthen this. Is there anything else you wish us to review today? And what's our final deadline for taking some form of action?
Mikey, I just wanted to say that there are several versions of a joint powers agreement that are floating around. I'm particularly interested in this conversation because I've been looking at those, and they do answer some of the questions excellent questions that Mr. Breed raised. They will cover, the joint powers agreement will cover the question of ownership. Governance is a very important issue. As the proposal stands now, the control would be in a board, a 4-person board, 2 supervisors from this board and 2 from Tuolumne County, and that has some built-in potential issues that need to be considered. So my point was that we're close to needing some guidance from this board as to the formation of that joint powers agreement, but we are working on it.
Thank you.
I guess to answer that a little bit, I would like to have a sort of a recommendation come out of the administrative office before I'm willing to, looking at the organizational structure of any joint power agreement, but also the fiscal component. I think Bob, your office needs to have a significant role to play in a recommendation to the board. So,
And I think if we were talking deadlines, we used to say, and I made a mistake, I think it says December 11th.
On the 11th, yeah.
Or, I mean, November 11th, yeah, it's a holiday. So don't come on the 11th. So if we could put it off and maybe just continue this for maybe we'll have some information. I know that Beverly Prior Architects is trying to get that basic grant application done and the architectural programming done by then, because she wants to be able to turn in, if we approved it for the technical, for the technical review, and she wanted to get it done, prior to that. So, but before the end of the month, and I forget what, maybe Jerry, December 9th is when it is, but Beverly wanted to get it done before then. So, we may or may not make the technical review based on some of this. And I think I agree. And Jim's been great, and also John, the new community development director, has kind of chimed in on some of this, which has been good because he's got some experience in doing that in some other counties. So there's some tough work ahead, but I think the bulk of it's been done, I hope.
All right. Is there a particular date that either administration or your department wishes to set to put this on the agenda, or
do the following
do we want to play it by?
So you know the 18th?
18th.
All right. In that case, I will entertain a motion to direct staff to continue working on this and bring it back, any results and recommendations, working with administration for our meeting of the 18th of November.
So moved.
Second.
Under second, I had just one additional comment.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I would like just one additional comment, and I don't know if this is possible or not, but Alan, or Mr. Breed, brought up a comment, and that is, it would be nice to look at a comparison between what's being proposed versus a standalone facility in Calaveras County. I think there are very few regional facilities. Most are standalone. I do worry about, quite frankly, what kind of working relationship we would have with Tuolumne County, since it's been strained. It has a history of being strained, and I don't want to get too deep into that, but I would be more comfortable with Amador than I am with Tuolumne. And I think
that's deep enough.
I guess it just all depends on which side of the county.
I worked 9 years in Amador, and
I would like to have a comparison of a standalone facility and see if we aren't better off looking at a standalone facility for Calaveras County versus a regional facility with Tuolumne. And I don't know if that's a...
All right. Does the maker of the motion and the provider of the second agree to incorporate that sentiment into that?
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. I don't support that.
Yeah, the more information available, I think the easier it is for me to make a decision. So I don't see from my point any harm in taking a good look at that. And just another point that I forgot on, excuse me, Mike, but on page 3 of your proposal here, you've got some dates listed that are meetings for the board. Just to remember that I believe this board decided there's been no meeting on December 2nd. It's listed here for one of them.
But there is not.
December 2nd?
There is not.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's...
You need a new motion?
Yeah,
Then
apparently I need a new motion.
Okay, I'll make the
this.
motion then, incorporating the comparison between a standalone to be incorporated within the overall, what do I want to say, item for the agenda when next scheduled.
I'll second that.
All right. There's a motion and a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, we have a 4-1 decision. We are now going to take, for purposes of setup for the following agenda item, we'll take a 5-minute break for that setup. I want to thank people for this participation, and also the people who have waited for so long for the economic development discussion. We'll do this in 5 minutes.
We'll get it done in 5 minutes? Man, that's going to be great.
In session, we now turn our attention to the question of whether or not the Board of Supervisors will direct staff to include an economic development element in the general plan update. And for introducing this process, we will turn to our interim director of the Community Development Agency.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. John Taylor, interim director of CDA. Before you this morning is an item having to do with a recommendation from the Calaveras County Business Council to incorporate a separate element into the county's general plan update entitled an economic development element. You've received our writings on this subject, and for the reasons outlined in the staff's report, we have recommended against the development of a separate element. But yet, without getting into too much detail on that, we're available for questions later. But there are representatives from the County Business Council and others here who would like an opportunity to address your board on the issue of the economic development element, as well as the specific document that has been provided to your board as a draft in response to what they had indicated was a March 18, 2008 direction from your board. So without going into any more detail on our side, we'd allow the community to provide some input.
Thank you. Let's start with if the proponents have a presentation to make, we'll start with that and then move to public comment, move it back to questions from the board for staff, and on to deliberations.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I agreed to step in for Feliciano Duran, who is the president of the Calaveras County Business Council and the CEO of Mark Twain St. Joseph's. So when I left my office this morning, I'm Ron Ashwanden, and I am a member of the Calaveras County Business Council and also a senior vice president for Pacific State Bank. When I left my office this morning about 8:30, we didn't have any problem loans. I'm sure by now we might have one or two. We've been here so long. But anyway, the purpose in us coming today was to, number one, state a position from a business standpoint in Calaveras County. I've lived here for over 25 years. And obviously, with the current economic situation, it even impacts us, what we're about to present even further. But we are an organization of volunteers who have assessed ourselves a number of shekels to be a part of the group. And we've never applied for bonds and or county, federal, state assistance, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're funded merely by our membership who wishes to make some points. And today, we actually came together. I want the group to stand up, the Business Council members, and also the Chamber to stand up who's had input in this document. And so that you can see that there's several really great people involved in this organization. And it's our goal to assist county government any way we can to find out how we can generate revenue and meet the budget objectives that you all have to deal with. And being here for 3 hours this morning, it's quite a process. So, without further ado, we actually came together as a group. We have got most business associations, Angels Camp, San Andreas, Murphy's, Arnold. We've got members from West Point and Valley Springs, so we're well representative throughout the county. We tried not to leave anyone out who had an interest in economic development for Calaveras County. And some of the issues that we know that we're facing today is that there's a lack of economic diversity as it results in income. In other words, if logging takes a hit or construction takes a hit, so does fee income. So even though we're diverse in some ways, we're very under-diversified in how we generate our revenue. Property tax revenues due to real estate slump is obviously decreasing. So you are receiving less revenue, and you will continue to do so for the next couple of years the way we project things to be. We suffer a lack of local jobs, especially as it affects our young people. Not everyone decides to go to a 4-year school and move away and go to school and work somewhere else. A few of those kids want to stay here and have opportunities to contribute to our own economy. Our per per capita income is lower than our surrounding counties. Our retail sales tax is behind other counties. In the third quarter of '07, the figures that we saw that were submitted by several of the newspapers in the area was Calaveras had 100 million in taxable sales transactions, Amador had 128 million, and Tuolumne County 176 million. Yes, we have different numbers as far as total population, but that's still a glaring number. So to address this issue, our organizations have worked together to draft an economic development element that we hope you will consider for inclusion into the Calaveras County General Plan. So I will now introduce Jim Conklin, who's the Executive Director for Calaveras, the Business Council, and he will kind of hit some salient points on the document that we came up with. Okay? Thank you.
Good morning, Supervisors. Again, I'm Jim Conklin, the Executive Director of the Business Council. I have got for your information the draft economic development element that we have put together, and there's also a cover letter on the document. And I must tell you, I'm very surprised that the gentleman said that we don't need a separate economic development element. You've been sitting here for the last hour listening to your revenue picture in terms of a juvenile detention facility. And I think everybody in this room would agree that we don't have the money for a lot of the things that we desperately need to do. I think you're all aware that Governor Schwarzenegger is attempting to call a special session of the legislature to deal with another $10 billion deficit. And I mean, just from being in this business as long as I have, I know what's coming at you. You're going to have some more hits. And the whole idea of how do we address the whole revenue picture in Calaveras County is one that I think every night you go to bed worrying about. You want to fund programs for a variety of different services that you simply don't have the money for. So we need in this county an official, professional, funded economic development revenue producing program. And you don't get that by hiding it away or putting it in connection with other things. You get that by addressing it head on and saying, where are the issues that we need to look at, and how do we collectively, public and private, work together to be able to address and resolve the issue. Now, we've done, I think, a great percentage of our side of the equation because, as Ron mentioned, the people who have been involved in this, putting this draft together, the Business Council, first of all, the Angels Camp Business Association, the Chamber, the Greater Arnold Business Association, the Murphy Business Association, the Calaveras County Visitors Bureau, and I don't know whether you noticed, but your superintendent of schools just left a few minutes ago, and he's been involved in this as well. So the whole idea of how do the public and the private come together to put their shoulder to the wheel to address this, look down the road 5 years. And what is Calaveras County going to be unless you have recognized the issue and put together an official program? And I stress the idea of collaboration between public and private. That's why the Business Council is here. We can't leave it up to public alone, and we can't leave it up to private alone. We've got to come together somehow and put this process together. Our thought was that this element would be a standalone unit, and that you folks would make a decision that at some point in time in early '09, a larger group of people, public and private, would come together to sit down and put a program together. So that's really what we're urging you to do, is simply say this is an issue that demands attention and that we need to work together to be able to do it, and it isn't housed within a general plan, but it stands alone within the general plan as a process that desperately needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board on this subject?
Good morning. I'm Kerry Williams with the Calaveras County Child Care Council, one of the public part of the county that, first of all, I want to say that we encourage whatever direction the board takes on, including economic development in the general plan, I don't think it's a conversation or a dialogue that should stop. I think we should continue talking about economic development planning for Calaveras County, and the Calaveras Child Care Council certainly encourages the continued dialogue of that issue. Why am I here this morning? The Calaveras Child Care Council really seeks to participate and be looked at as a stakeholder in the future economic development planning for Calaveras County. We believe that in Calaveras County that the early care and education industry is critical to the current and future economy. And why do we think so? Generally, when we talk about child care, and quite naturally for most of you, you think of child care and early care and education as providing a safe place for kids to play and to learn. But on the other hand, the early care and education industry, like other economic structures, helps build the local economy and improves the quality of life of residents. So how big is the early care and education industry in Calaveras County? First of all, it produces well over 170 jobs just in early care and education. Secondly, it allows over 7,300 parents, families, to go to work and to earn over $35 million collectively. That's $35 million back into this local economy. Thirdly, the industry itself, the total gross receipts, contributes over $6.2 million into the local economy. So that's why I think that the early care and education industry needs to be looked at. We ask that we are part of that dialogue. We ask that we are allowed to participate in the ongoing and continuing dialogue, and that we're part of any future economic development planning and discussions. And that actually is really all I need to say, except for one thing. Early in the discussion, I want to show you, just read something to you, why we think that the early care and education industry is so vital to the quality of life for Calaveras County. I was struck by a survey that was done among police chiefs nationwide that agreed, 91% of them agreed that a greater investment in after-school educational child care programs would lead to a reduction in costs caused by crime. A local police chief in Los Angeles, it was not so local to us, the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department, what he said just struck me so much was, keeping kids waiting in line for preschool multiplies the likelihood that I will see them in a police lineup later. That's why we think the early care and education industry is so vital to the county of Calaveras. Thank you.
Thank you. Who will it be?
I'm going to muscle my way in. My name is Barbara Uke, and I'm here as a board member for the Child Care Council and also as a working mother. First, I'd like to reiterate all of Carrie's comments. I'm completely in support of them, and I'm sure he had a lot more to say, but we are getting close to the lunch hour, so I think he kept his comments short. Second, I'd ask your indulgence, and I want to tell you a personal story. 3 years ago, I started looking for infant care because I was going back to work at the DA's office. And what I found was that there was really nothing available for working families who could afford child care. The county had plenty of options, or some options, for people who could not afford to pay for their own child care, but if you could afford it, there was nothing available. What I ended up doing is whatever I had to do to find child care. I worked with stay-at-home moms and eventually found some in-home daycare, but I ended up, even though I live in San Andreas and work in San Andreas, I had to go to Berkeley, Valley Springs. I ended up in a place in Angels Camp, which were good options. There was one location that ended up opening up in San Andreas, one for infants, and for a few months it was a good option, but my child ended up getting burned by a candle accidentally while she was there, and that's something that can happen when you have kind of these in-home providers that don't necessarily have all the support they need. So it is a very big issue for me personally, and I think that I'm not the only working parent in the county, obviously. So for those 3 years, we hobbled along, driving all over the county, and we were a two-parent family, 2 incomes. good income, steady jobs, and it was just a very big issue for us. The reason I tell this story is because what I learned from that firsthand is that childcare is not just a social issue, it's not a family issue, it's an economic issue, it's an infrastructure issue. It's something that if it's not available, it affects the working families. And I lost personally probably an average of 1 day a month of work due to childcare issues. When you have a stay-at-home mom you're relying on or an in-home daycare, that's a one-provider system. If that person's sick, if their child's sick, they're closed for the day. So therefore, you lose a day of work. That obviously affects your coworkers, people having to pick up the slack. There's kind of this snowball effect that goes on because of this lack of infrastructure. And, you know, I know my story is anecdotal, but I know I'm also not the only parent of a young child in the county. And again, I'm fortunate. I've got a good steady job. I have a very understanding boss. You know, and I have a spouse who also has a good income. And I just don't understand, and I can't imagine what some of the people who are less fortunate than me must go through. Without affordable quality childcare in the county, we really hobble our working families to get ahead and make a living, and obviously this is going to have a snowball effect on the rest of our economy. Affordable quality childcare is an economic issue, and I urge the board to address it in the general plan or in other ways that you may see fit. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dixon Collins. I'm a general contractor in Angels Camp. The Business Council has worked very hard on this element, and our idea has been that if you don't have a separate element, then you don't have an intention to bring money into the county, which is what you need. And you can have all the elements that you want to determine how land should be developed, or how water should be developed and all that sort of thing. But if you don't have anything addressing economic income, then that drives everything else. And it seems to me like it should contain the importance of a separate element within the general plan. We have worked with all the organizations that we can possibly find on the verbiage on this, getting everybody's ideas, being inclusive, including all of you supervisors, except for Mr. Claudino, who was on vacation, and I apologize for that. And one of the things that I was very struck with was Mr. Volinsky's website is just rife with really great ideas on the need for an economic development area. And he's been instrumental in suggesting to the board that there be one included. So part of our verbiage and part of our inclusion was everything, all of your ideas and the ideas of every one of the board that we included them. So I was disappointed, or I am disappointed, that the staff does not think that this is worthy of being an element within the general plan. I have not received a phone call from anyone in the staff telling me why, and so it came as a complete surprise, which is disappointing, because I think that, and I encourage you to really seriously consider including this. We don't start a business without doing a pro forma. And that pro forma is all about the economics. How are we going to make the money? And that's extremely important. And I think that as leaders of our community, I would encourage you to start paying attention and take the lead in bringing in the ideas of how can we make money in this county to give better services and allow the businesses to start making more money, to get better jobs, increase the jobs, and do a lot of the things necessary to help us have a better life for our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Kirby Smith from Calaveras Telephone over in Copperopolis. So we're on the western slope of the county. And I would like to commend the assessor's office first and foremost for rolling back my property taxes. And I understand that's been very widespread, so it obviously affects the economic vitality of this county and the budget issues that Bob and others are dealing with here. So I think that really underscores the point that has been made of the importance and need for this as a separate element and given a lot of appropriate attention. At Calaveras Telephone, we talk daily to our customers, and we're hearing many people unable to afford their phone bill. The economics, as we all know, are very serious, and I think unless some real effort is put in to make this a separate issue and given great attention, the county is really going to fall behind more and more. So we ask you to give it its separate attention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. Tom Infacino for the Calaveras Planning Coalition. I just want to make 4 points regarding this agenda item. First, as with all constructive public input on the general plan update, the coalition welcomes the input from the Calaveras Business Council, and we hope that you will also welcome this input. The second point I want to make is, as we have said before at the coalition, whether the board wants to have a separate optional element or incorporate issues into the mandatory elements, that's really up to you. Our main concern is that issues are handled with good policies and good implementation measures, regardless of where they appear in the plan. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's the content of a provision that is key, not its location. The draft element before you has a number of provisions that can easily be incorporated into the mandatory elements. For example, Goal 1, Bullet 10, preserve and enhance tourists' ability to travel easily to different destinations throughout the county, could become part of the mandatory circulation element. Goal 3, Bullet 2, ensure adequate opportunities for future and expanded commercial and business activity throughout the county, could become part of the mandatory land use element. And Goal 4, Bullet 3, encourage businesses that foster energy efficiency and independence, forest health and fire safety, could become part of the mandatory conservation element. The third point I want to make is that we agree with staff that if the board wants to proceed with an independent economic development element, the draft presented today should be annotated with the information from the background report and should be refined by Mintier and Associates in conformity with the OPR general plan guidelines. The final point I want to make is that if the county wants to move forward with the economic development element, we hope that it will be circulated for public input so that others will have a chance to add to it. I'm sure that folks will want to add provisions regarding the ag and forest product sector, the government sector, and the transfer payment sectors of our local economy. Also, the Economic Summit breakout sessions last summer identified very useful implementation measures that would improve the draft. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Jeff Davidson, today representing the Calaveras County Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like to, once again thank the board. It was earlier this spring that we all got together with the City of Angels and others to begin to discuss some of the economic issues. And obviously it's a critical time in our county's economic future, and we need to address these issues. I certainly appreciate the work that Dixon's done with the Business Council on bringing this back to the forefront. The Chamber does believe we do need to include an economic element in our general plan. We hope that you will begin to direct us to start to hold an open process to create this document. So far, it hasn't been as open as maybe certainly we wouldn't have liked. We have not had any input in this document other than about 2 weeks ago we were given the final draft, or a draft, and asked to respond on it by November 4th. We had several reasons that I did go through it and marked it up fairly heavily, and there's some really good material in there. But there are some things that I think need to be addressed further, and some things that I don't know are exactly, they certainly aren't what I would lobby for in the document. I think there are other examples of economic elements. San Luis Obispo, if you have time to Google that, has a very good model that's much different. The Chamber of Commerce believes we need to begin with a baseline of our existing conditions, and I think maybe perhaps for the last 10 years, so we can take that information. And when we began this discussion, we tried to talk about diversifying our economy, and I think that they talk a lot about that in the Business Council's document. But I think we need to really address those deficiencies that are causing hardships for not just the people here, but also those in government trying to provide services that they need. And we need to find out where are we lacking specifically, and to begin to address it. Where are we healthy specifically, and look at those issues where we're healthy, like perhaps tourism, and say, how do we preserve that health and maybe improve, the wages or things along those lines. Certainly in retail, I mean, we all recognize that retail is an impediment to, one, providing, healthy county services. Also, I think we could be serving our community, the people who live in our community, better, as opposed to having to leave all the time. A community college education or higher education, I think, is another portion that could be addressed more thoroughly. I am not a proponent of targeting businesses, so to speak. More a proponent of looking at the process and letting the free market determine who comes here and why. Because I think the best people to decide whether or not they want a business or a store or anything else here are those folks who live here by using that. And I think the process has been an impediment for economic development over the years. Lot size is, we have a bunch of old commercial lots here that exist today that are not in a symmetric configuration that will allow many modern retail facilities to locate. I've talked many times about Craigan and others. They have the same, you can buy the same blue spray paint on any Craigan in the exact same location, the same bottle of Merlot at Safeway on the same aisle for a reason, because that's how they want to do business. And they have the same plan. And we may have places where we can do that. We may have places where we can't. I certainly think when we talk about design standards, we have to look at, okay, where are our design standards? Certainly a design standard in Murphy's is going to be much different than an industrial corridor in Valley Springs. And so I think instead of just saying we need to have, only high quality designs, which some of this document talks about, we need to be a little more specific about how we do that. And the Chamber feels, and I feel, that the only way to do that is to begin and hold public meetings. I've been very impressed with the water element meetings. I think they've been handled very well. We've gotten very diverse groups. Paul Raggio and I sat in a group of 2 the other day and actually came up with a document that we're pretty proud of. And I think that you only do that when you hold open public opportunities for everybody. And so the Chamber hopes that we will continue down the path that we started in March, that we will include everybody, and that we will come up with a document that we can all be happy with, but that recognizes that there are going to be differences in this county, and there's different types of economic development. We really need all of it, but I think we have to do this document together, not as it has been presented. So thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Hello again. Excuse me. My name is Dave Haley. I'm also a member of the board of the Chamber of Commerce, but I'm not speaking as a board member. I'm speaking as a person who over many, many years has been involved in facilitating the creation of housing and the creation of businesses. I do think that having an economic development element within the general plan is a very necessary thing to do, as necessary as a housing component. It's very important to think these things out independently. We all know how important it is to have a housing element, but we seem to overlook the economics of the community, and we kind of suffer because of that. I think we need a vehicle to help us focus that, and I think the general plan on the government side of the equation is a good document for all of us to share in and to participate in, and us from the private sector use as a tool to help facilitate good economic development. But I urge you to have an independent economic development element, and I appreciate the Business Council for their forthright effort into coming forward and creating a document that can help us facilitate these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David Bowman, and I'm a member of the Business Council as well, but I don't speak as an official representative of my compadres. I have a financial security practice in Murphy's for a company called Northwestern Mutual. I've lived here for about 16 years. I'm also an incoming board member of the Yosemite Association, which is a wonderful nonprofit that supports Yosemite National Park. So I have an appreciation for parks and the roles they have. And Yosemite attracts 3.5 or 4 million people a year, and with the exception of the concessionaire there or the few National Park Service people that live there, everybody goes home. They don't earn their living there. They earn it, they come because the federal government drew a line around and said this is a special place, and all you have to do is go there and realize it is special. Calaveras County is not a park. It can't be a park. It's beautiful enough to be a park, but there's got to be economic development here. Sure, we have our tourists come through and whatnot. And it dovetails in with my other personal observation over the last 15 years. My practice is built around helping families and businesses develop financial independence, financial security, in hopes that they won't have to rely on counties and states and federal governments for good health care or an adequate retirement. And I've noticed over the last 15 years doing business in downtown Murphy's that the composition of who my clientele is changing. The people that have the dollars to make the decisions and can afford to hire someone like me are getting older and older and older because they get their dollars from somewhere else. They come from Social Security, they come from somewhere else. There's a decline in the ability of young, energetic, whatever age group who are trying to start businesses and run businesses to be able to afford to have the businesses and provide those benefit programs for the young people that we so desperately want. I don't think we want a park. We can't afford it. And I don't think we just want to be a huge Rossmore relying on just flows of income because for many decades of work we get to retire. So this economic development from a philosophical point of view, regardless of how it's included, is critically important for decades to come for that healthy mix of people in school and people deciding to stay here or to return here after school for work. And it would be lovely to live in a park, but we can't. And so as a personal citizen and as somebody acutely interested in the financial well-being of people across the decades of their lifespan, this is really, really important. I encourage you to include it and emphasize it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board on this topic?
See if we can get out here in time. Ditto. I like tourism, of course, obviously. I'm in that business.
Could you
I'm
start?
Stephen Fairchild.
Thank you.
The underground part of the counties, and a member of the organization. I'd like to remind that almost any time the government comes up with a document, it's restrictive in some way or another. The U.S. Constitution was fought over bitterly. And when they came up with that, they realized that they missed something, and they came up with the Bill of Rights. It took a serious battle to get the Bill of Rights in there because it restricted what government could do. When I came to this county back 36 years ago, I ran smack into a zoning. I didn't know anything about zoning. We had zoning going. You can hear me. All right. And when I wanted to do the California Caverns Cave City, which, by the way, worked out very well, and the supervisors did a wonderful job on that one. But it was the first time I ran into this concept of government power and how they can restrict it to the point where you can't get anything done, possibly. It didn't happen then. But since then in 1976, I was on the board of Chamber of Commerce, and we had, I think, our first general plan about that time. And to me, it looked like another thing to get in the way of doing something constructive. And it reduced options, basically. And it passed. And now, then we also came up with things like environmental impact studies, which reduce options. We have now CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. Again, reduces options. But even more than that, gives it a good excuse not to do anything at all. You can keep putting things off and putting things off and making more studies until it's just too late to do anything, or you run out of money or time or effort. So that's why I'm concerned with this latest version, what we call General Plan 2, is that that's my thought when I first saw it. It basically outlines turning Calaveras County into a park, and we can't live in a park. I have to iterate that. So my feeling was that this economic element is important. It's kind of like the Bill of Rights. It says, yes, we have these restrictions, but we also have these obligations to make things work. And so that's why I'm standing here saying, yeah, I think we need it, or some version of it, in the document itself. And with that, I'll adjourn myself.
Thank you, sir. Last call for public presentation. All right, in that event, are there questions or comments from the board?
I'll give a couple comments, if that's all right. First off, let me say that I am very strongly in favor of an independent economic element in the general plan. I think that's, if we are going to progress, I think we have to have a very strong economic statement, and you know, it needs to be well thought out. I would hope that you know, the business community, whether it be the Business Council or the Chamber or the Angels Business Association or the Murphy's Business Association or Valley Springs Business Association, I think they need to get together. I think we, you know, don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. I think there are a lot of jurisdictions that are somewhat similar to our own that have economic elements, and they should be reviewed and the like. I look at, if the board does have if there are 3 votes or more for an independent economic element, this is, you know, just the first phase. There's going to be lots of additional input, as there should. It's from all the business communities, and you know, we've already heard from the environmental community, and I'm sure we'll hear more from them. So I am very much in favor, to answer the question that I guess is primarily before us, of an independent economic element. I am not in favor of including child care issues in the general plan. I mean, you put things in the general plan basically on those kind of issues because you want extractions. And you know, we talk about, and a lot of the extractions, quite frankly, come from environmental reviews and having to meet CEQA. I am not for putting something in the general plan that you know, some people use and some people don't use, but everybody's going to pay. There are lots of child care options available, and I don't think child care and, you know, public health, welfare, you can just start adding it up if we're going to start down the path of just, you know, including every social welfare program in the general plan. And I'm not at all in favor of doing that. Those have to be addressed, those needs have to be addressed independent of the general plan and not incorporated in the general plan, in my opinion. You know, I've spoken to some about, you know, how I would like to see the general plan proceed. Seems to me that the highest priority in the county is to have a legally defensible general plan. And so I think we need to proceed. I would divide it into 3 phases. I would say the first phase is to get a good, strong, legally defensible general plan in the shortest time period allowable, with still doing it correctly. You know, the second phase to me might be something like the economic element, et cetera, to the extent that it cannot be done concurrently, then, you know, bring it in on phase 2. Phase 3, in my opinion, are the community plans. Now, some of these phases, maybe you can do components concurrently, and if so, that's great. But in my opinion, phase 1 is to get a legally defensible general plan in as timely a manner as possible. I'm very much interested in the phase two, if it has to be a phase two, the economic element, the water element, other elements that may be optional that I am very strongly in favor of. But the mandatory ones have to get done, and they have to get done in a very timely manner so we have a defensible general plan. And then we need to come back to the community plans after we do the optional elements, so we have a strong general plan in front of us. So those are my thoughts, and that's how I would like to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move down the lines. Supervisor Claudino.
Well, this is very difficult. It's almost like the last issue that was before us with regard to need for juvenile facilities. It'd be a foolish argument to say that we do not, or that we do have anything that's adequate here, because both of those things would be foolhardy to say. At this point, the idea of a strong economic plan would be difficult to deal with, and I don't argue with most of anything that was said here today, especially by the members of the public and those organizations that have worked so hard. However, the general plan update that we are now engaged in trying to accomplish is not only behind schedule, but overburdened with the lack of resources to get this completed. And to be honest with you, I think that the elements that we now have committed to, the mandatory ones that we now have committed to, can provide some relief or inclusion by the elements, by the topics that are included in this economic element as a standalone element. They can be, as Mr. Infacino said, it's not necessarily where they're located, but the fact that they're included. I would like to see, first and foremost, I have no argument against having an economic element whatsoever. My concerns is how possible is that at this point, and how much further delay are we going to have with completing, as Supervisor Tryon said, a legally defensible general plan, which we've already suffered a great deal of criticism and expense over the fact that we do not have that. So what I would like to do, well, for instance, when Mr. Davidson gave his points, very well taken, Jeff, and that the fact that a lot of these issues with regard to lot size or what business can be here, what type of business there, and so on and so forth, those things can be addressed, and I think somewhat successfully, in the land use element of the general plan. I think that Supervisor Tryon probably voiced my feelings on this fairly well, in that my concern now is to get the foundation built. You can't build a structure of any kind without a foundation, and our general plan as we have it now is in dire need and necessity, a legal necessity, of being updated, and I am in favor of getting that done as efficiently and as quickly as possible. I've been here for 4 years, or nearly 4 years, and the one thing I have not heard is that our processes are crisp. Crisp. You know, we are always in the process and seldom in the completion category here. And if we are going to do an economic element as a standalone element, which I have no philosophical argument to, I agree that it should come at a time that is not going to extend the resources or time necessary to get our general plan done. And I would be agreeable in philosophy to doing this in phases. I would like to see our general plan, as it is obligated now, to be completed. We have barely have the resources and time available to do that. I don't know if this can be done by assignment in phases, but if that is possible, I think at that time it would be wise to consider the economic element or any other element that might present itself. And again, I feel the same with the community plans. As important as they are, I'm not in favor of the community plans holding up the completion of the general plan update that we have been laboring with for the past 2 or 3 years.
Well, you're
Let me
segueing
see.
neatly into
Yes,
Marita's
my
comments.
favorite topic.
She would like to remind you all that she predicted alone that 2 years was an
Let's see,
impossible
this
time
says
frame.
2010. and that's not adding
Make
an
a sign,
economic
Rita, put it up as a
development.
billboard.
I do not support an economic development element. I did not support a water element, because what is important are the goals, policies, and implementation measures, not that you have your own separate element. All elements have to be integrated, and they're each given equal weight in a general plan. Not any one is more important than the other. And with each added element comes added time and cost. And I'm not sure if we can't even afford opening our jails and can't do a juvie facility, where we get the money to do an economic development element. But let me be a little more specific, because I do have, there were some things in what was given to us by the Business Council which are very focused. There has to be a specific economic development strategy. We have to integrate the economic policies to land use, circulation, public facilities, could be public safety, administration, so forth. And the Business Council gave us at least 2 examples. Focus on major employment uses in target areas. Okay, that could possibly go under land use. Ensure neighborhoods adequately protected from major commercial development through design, buffering, traffic management. Again, that could go through land use and circulation. So there's a lot of information in here that we can incorporate in what we already have or what we're mandated to have. I agree with Jeff Davidson that we have to have a land use inventory, type, location, the intensity of use, and is this going to be consistent with the economic development strategy that is proposed before us? Affordable housing. I mean, how is that going to fit into the economics and into housing, which is the only element that's required to be updated every 5 years. Everything else, if I remember correctly, does not have a time frame. What is the capacity of the existing infrastructure to accommodate growth and its impact on economic development? That also has to be part of circulation of public facilities. What about funding, short-term borrowing, long-term debt? The board, the county has critical issues that have come before us recently, which is solid waste. We have a Cadillac system. How do we continue to afford it? Because the fee that we're now paying doesn't pay for that. And of course, the ever-popular roads, the RIM fee, and how do we fund the other half of that? That is also part of economic development. I think that some of the information that's been developed by the Business Council is real appropriate to be slipped into sections of what's mandated for us to happen without having a title that says economic development. I go back to my premise that it's just a document. I only use the word just without respect. It is a document that sits on the shelf until someone comes in and wants to develop a project. They want to do parcel split, they want to do a rezone, they want to do a subdivision. You take the document off the shelf and say, do they have in their proposal the conditions that the county is requiring under the general plan, and then of course under a community plan. It isn't going to make something happen until we have something happen in a land use category. And that's where I want to see economic development. What do we have? Going back to really what Jeff said, what do we have? What do we need? Do we have the appropriate zoning? And where is it located? Those are critical, and some of the issues that the Business Council brought up or recommended can be fit into that as, I think, a good match. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Callaway. Supervisor Thomas.
I think I just heard Marita say that in her opinion that the general plan would sit on a shelf until an applicant comes before us, and then we would pick it up and we would compare his proposed development to how the general plan was written. I couldn't disagree more vehemently. The general plan, if it does its job, it should be sitting on the shelf ready to be analyzed by the proponent, by the hoped-for business development team that is looking for places to go to expand their business or to move out of the Bay Area and go to a foothill community. And in my opinion, it should be written as aggressively for business development as it possibly can be to give a company strong indication that we are open to business, that we are willing to be helpful and that we're being proactive. Frankly, the only thing that concerns me about interjecting this economic element into the general plan at this point is how we fund it, how we fund the effort that it would be required. When Jeff Davidson mentioned that the work on the water element is going well, if you'll all remember, that was the fact that it is going well is largely attributable to the fact that there's a $50,000 pot of money that CCWD offered to facilitate it, and that has helped a lot. I think that this incorporating this element into the general plan is conceivable. It goes without saying that Mintier Harnish, which incidentally I want to acknowledge that I do, I keep seeing these presentations that say Mintier and Associates, and then I get confused when they're called Mintier Harnish. So it is a firm called Mintier Harnish now. But they gave us a bid, and I think that many of you realize that I was in the construction contracting business for a long time, and you have proposals that you submit based on your expectation about the amount of work that is going to be involved in a project, and then suddenly, after 2 years into the project, we're coming along and saying to Mintier, oh, by the way, we want you to stay on schedule, and we don't want to pay any more money, but we would like for you to weave this into the document. I'd like to hear some comments about how you accomplish that. That it looks and feels and tastes a lot like a change order. Putting it in the context of the general construction and subcontracting realm, you have an original contract, and then if something comes along that's out of the scope of your agreement, then you add a change order. Who's going to fund the change order? Is my question. I don't have any. I started off by saying I think we ought to be pro-business, proactive, and I've done a lot of work individually, pursuing different companies to come into my district and into the county particularly. So I wouldn't want anybody to misunderstand that I'm giving a mixed message. My message is, yes, I hear what you're saying. It needs to be done. Just I don't know how we do it without getting off track and how we do it without spending a whole lot more money. I'd be willing to hear some suggestions about how we could do that.
Thank you, Supervisor Thomas. I'll now make my comments and try to take some notes on some things people said over the course of this. For my take, our history of economic development in this county is kind of interesting. We've often put all our eggs in one basket, kind of had a monodimensional economy. We started with a gold rush, a great 6-7 year boom, followed by something like a 100-year bust. We did timber and put that, my district in particular was quite prosperous with timber, but that also ended largely when we lost all of our mills. There were once 8, we now have 0. we had a housing boom up until recently, and we find ourselves not very well diversified in defense at the current moment with a housing bust. People can say that government shouldn't get involved in planning because we always mess it up, or that the market can somehow leave, left to its devices, will somehow fix these things. My take is that the people who are talking about a partnership have got it right, that there's a need for government to set a tone and a direction that accomplishes things in the public interest. And for sure, in my view, the public interest is having a diversified economy that has specific land use designations so that we know where we're putting what, that we don't set up poorly planned circumstances in which any kind of economic development becomes an instant neighborhood or a community dispute because we've got incompatible land uses next to each other. I think this has to be put much more front and center into our planning process. Without it, we're simply, I think, assuming a kind of what I guess I would call the immaculate conception version of economic planning. I really do welcome the efforts that the business community has made so far. I think the ag community has gotten mobilized and has had an economic aspect to its proposals. I think that the Business Council has been very constructive in consulting with a number of folks and putting together the document that's before us. I think the Chamber and others have helped host an economic summit that was, I think, great at putting people together. And the question is toward what end? Where does this come home in specifics? And I think the general plan is a good starting point. I think that, of course, broad language is always nice, but it's the implementation elements that really guide us, or should, I should say, guide us, because we've adopted a number of things that just never got around to happening. But we can't afford, if you're looking at our national picture, and many of us grew up in a generation that never faced what we're currently looking into the jaws of. But if we don't really think this stuff through, and I see the effort to develop an economic element to our general plan as a process by which it's a venue almost in which we can pull together the necessary input to really think this through better than we have over the last number of generations. I don't think a boom-bust, monodimensional, all eggs in one basket economy has worked very well for this area. I think what we are doing is exporting a good portion of the money that we get from elsewhere, our pensions, our Social Security, the bulk of the checks coming in here, and then exporting it to other counties is a very good way to have an effective, healthy, and robust economics to a community, which I think is very essential to other kinds of health. So much for the history. On the question of the whether there are health and human services aspects to this, we keep on saying, well, does child care, does that have any business? Do we have any business doing putting that into our plans or our implementation measures? What about vocational training and education? If we plan to encourage economic development in this county in a broad way, it requires a workforce. I'm not sure how you get one, or how let's say somebody opens up a place. If they don't have people ready to come to work on time, effective, clean and sober, functional, you don't have an economic plan. What you've got is a wish list that has no hope of ever being implemented. If you've got working families that are commuting 3 towns over to drop off their kids in the morning, you're harming productivity. I'm telling you, it just doesn't work out. So I do believe these things are part of economic infrastructure. Having vocational, not liquidating vocational ed, which we have done in this county, virtually, should be part of our thoughts. What is that about? What do working families do with their kids, and where do we house people? Are you going to actually build places where people are to go to work and build the places where they live so far apart that you're creating economic burdens on the energy and burdening our circulation element? These things, as people have suggested, do belong integrated in a document. And a document has to be fully integrated with all of its elements relating to each other. In fact, the slippery slope that led us to where we are today with what some refer to as a, I don't want to use the terms legally indefensible, because that's not what we're saying. And in fact, if O.J. can get off in his first trial, almost anything's legally defensible. But how do we defend ourselves in a piecemeal document that has been run out in phases over the last 30 years, where our community plans, our mandatory elements, our practices, our language, our zoning code conflict with each other? It didn't happen intentionally. Nobody set forth these documents to be in contradiction. It's just that we did them in different times and with different boards and different staff, and it was hard to keep it into one piece. We set forth this round, however awkwardly and however poorly we planned out our timing, or however much staff we hoped we would have working on it, and however much staff didn't. It does appear to me that our original concept of a comprehensive review of our general plan and integration of all its elements and its relation to our community plans and zoning code is still the right concept. And even if it takes us a little more time, it would be better to get it right this round than to continue to blow it. That said, our economics will be what drives our capacity to act on any of our plans and our dreams. That with the continued export of capital to other places, this county will not thrive, will not even, my worry is that under the current national circumstance and as the California budget goes into the toilet, that we are going to be hurt, as usual, disproportionately in the rural areas, and that nobody is going to be coming and helping bail us out. So if we don't get this time right, and if we don't think this through and have implementation measures and land uses and the full infrastructure necessary to make this happen, we will have once again spoken in high-minded rhetoric and words without an ability to make them real. I believe we owe these communities and our county better than this, and I do support a freestanding economic development element to our general plan. Now, let me talk for just a moment about process. And I'll be quick. I know I'm talking a long time here. I do think we need full input, and I know that there's some process issues. Whenever there's initiation, there's also kind of also a reaction. You know, you didn't ask me, or you didn't go here or there. I do believe that the county should afford a broad input on this topic. I think that we need to manage this effectively, and that leads me to one last comment. Of course, the staff, an overburdened staff, an understaffed department charged with doing this massive project and trying to make up for 30 years of maybe not doing it all completely, is going to feel some resistance to more mandates. We have the same feeling when the state asks us to do things without funding. And we can get into what I consider to be a false dichotomy. We're either going to flog staff into doing this and have to raise money we don't have, or we're going to try to set up a new paradigm, which I think is going to be required in this coming decade anyway. We're going to be losing funding on a whole lot of things that the county used to do by itself. And it's my view that the kind of partnerships that we've seen in ag, from ag on the zoning effort, where, yes, there was some imperfect language that came in, and yes, it did take some staff time to try to figure out how to massage it into a good product. But what you had in the end was a document that the ag community in its full unified form supported and was legally defensible and properly put forward. I think the same essential dynamic needs to happen in the non-mandatory elements. We've already contracted at great cost for the mandatory elements, but I would certainly like to use and harness the energy of our business community, and yes, our educational community and the folks who are working with kids and families to put together some raw documents, which we are beginning to have before us. We should hone those carefully. We should involve the community in a good dialogue so that when there are flaws and concerns that we express those, the technical concerns that may come up, and that we engage the community in trying to resolve those issues rather than overburden staff with it. You have so many people willing to work. You have so many people who are inspired to participate. Why don't we see whether we can harness that in a more effective, more organized way so that this doesn't become the false dichotomy between between having staff that can't do it, assigned to do it, all by themselves, and not doing it at all. There is door number 3. Let's try it. That's my comments. Now we get to the point where what do we do? And
Steve, I have a question.
Yes, of course.
Mr. Taylor, under financing in your staff report, yes, when you said the cost for the water elements, at least $50,000 for additional, is that on top of the 50 CCWDs putting
No, the
forward?
CCWD committed to up to $50,000.
Okay.
Every dime of that money's been committed to consulting services between CCWD's consultants and the county's consultants.
Okay.
And so there's a whole lot of time the staff has been put into this over and above the original workload that's not included in the
That's not
$50,000.
included, okay. And,
And for which we're getting paid anyway, so.
yeah, well, all depends on what pot of money you get paid
Well,
out of.
it just comes at the
but I
expense of other
just-
services.
No, I understand that. What I'm asking is, on top of the 50, do you know what it's going to cost to pursue just the water element portion?
Well,
And that
out of
excludes
pocket,
stuff-
that's the amount that we can count on now, is the $50,000. We've pressured the consultants to work within a budget, and they've committed to doing that. And I think we have a $5,000 contingency in concept, but we're looking at the $50,000 as being sufficient to deal with the out-of-pocket cash expenditures for consulting services.
Okay.
That doesn't pay for any of the staff time of CCWD or county people.
Okay. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. I guess what I challenge, if I was counting my votes on the board, is Steve and Tom. How do you propose to pay for an economic element? I mean, it's
Well-
$50,000 for the water, which is probably a little more complex, I would think, than maybe the economic element. But that, I mean, whether it is or isn't, this is an additional cost that's a general fund, that we pay for out of the general fund.
Yeah, and I have to,
And
the only
I
thing
have-
we know is $50,000 attributable to the additional element that we've just begun to work on. The fact of the matter is we don't know how much it would cost to do the economic development element as freestanding in concept, but also integrated fully within the
Right.
balance of the document. It has to be legally defensible through the thread of all the elements. So we, at the very least, we would have to go back to Mintier, Harnish, Mintier and Associates, and get a scope of work, negotiate a scope of work and an estimate of cost.
I mean, I guess my concern, colleagues, is that we know where our budget is now. We know where it's going to be in '09 and '10. And now we're saying, out of general fund, we want to take X amount of money, be it $10,000 or $50,000, and put to this economic development element. And we have all these things coming up to us daily, and we have to keep our eye on where we're going to be come January when Mr. Lawton comes to us and say, board, you're going to have to start making some cuts, or we're going to have to get into situations with, I mean, Tuolumne County's already gone into furlough. So they might make more sales tax dollars, but they've already done a furlough, and which is whether it should be at Christmas or after Christmas or how they should pay. That's not it. We need, as a board, to keep our eye on that bottom line. And is it worth it to you to take out of the general fund another $10,000 or $50,000 so you can have this economic element when in the next 2 years we can't even afford to staff what we do? And anyway, and then we're going to extend the timeline. And now you're going to extend the timeline. I mean, Tom said, let's just do what we have to, and then when we finish, add in the other elements. But if we're going to have to do an environmental impact report on the whole document, you don't want to do an environmental impact report on what we have to do and then come back and do another environmental impact report on your additional elements. I mean, every time we vote on something, we're spending money, and I don't think we can afford to do that.
All right, well, I believe the outset was, at the outset of that remark was a question, which was how would the two of us deal with the economic question, and here's how I would propose this be framed. First, I would say that it would have to meet the same timelines and not extend it. Secondly, I would say that the bulk of the work would need to be done by the community. Third, I would say that work should be overseen or coordinated with a staff person in the department. I don't think it should take a lot of meetings. I don't think it requires much but reading different incarnations and input and trying to synthesize it. And finally, I think the last piece of it is Mintier integrating this as input into the and making sure that there's consistency with the other elements that he's working on. I wouldn't imagine, given the amount of money that we're sending his way, that that would be huge in its cost, but we should assess it and make sure that it's within our means. I would hope he'd actually say, because it's simply taking input, that it fits with the, and as you've suggested, most of this is at least can be contemplated within his scope anyway. The net cost, in my view, would be the staff time devoted to meetings coordinating with community endeavors, the review, the technical review, to make sure that the element as it develops is legal, and the integration of that into the final document. Again, it should not take, there's so much energy around this particular item, as there is with, I believe, water and the ag stuff. It should not be seen as so burdensome as the legally mandated items in this, or as expensive. It doesn't have to be flashy and lengthy. It's just a beginning. It gets our foot in the door and gets us on with business, but it also gives the venue necessary to boost this forward. It's a moment where there's enough attention riveted that we could save a lot of money if we just took advantage of the people who are willing and skilled to be able to assist us. I think it's a small amount of staff time. I think the ag stuff was more complicated than this is.
But you know what, Steve? I have projects that I want to get done that are right on the drawing board projects right now. And every time we take a staff member away, which is what we're going to be doing, and putting on something else, and each of us have projects in our respective areas that we would like done. And I guess I'd want staff to say, I mean, do you think this is going to take 5 hours, 50 hours? I mean, they're the experts. Every time you say it's not going to take staff time, and I hear that, I hear a boundary line adjustment that's just been pushed out 2 months.
I would like to at least talk a little bit about, the standalone
element. What it really means is a set of goals, policies, and implementation stratagem that filter down into the other elements, that find themselves into the land use element, an economic policy, a goal policy, and a strategy, which filters down into the land use element, which must be the implementation venue for that economic development strategy, and the circulation element, and the safety element. So it isn't just a matter of turning it over to the public and saying, you know, go out and craft ye a general plan element. The fact of the matter is, it needs to be in language that gives direction. It is a statement of intent and action. And it's going to happen from the economic development element, if you have it separate, into these other separate elements. That's where the activities are actually going to be identified. We are going to do this with this land. We're going to do this with this circulation. We're going to do this with this safety and the conservation element. We're going to do that there. To integrate that is not just a matter of editorial art. To make sure that what the community comes up with is consonant with these other elements, and that you're trying to achieve through these other elements is more than editorial art. It's work. The staff time is that we're devoting already to the water element. You only have 2 people in the department right now that are management, not on overtime or comp time. If they're not paid overtime, they get comp time. That comes at the expense of the overall. You got 8 hours of work that we pay. Anything beyond that, or the 40-hour week, is earning either overtime or comp time. That comes at the expense of our ability to address other workload. The practical reality is, when you substitute one particular priority of work for another, something gets kicked out. We're not going to argue against a separate economic element. We want to argue for doing it right. And if you're going to do it right, it's going to take a certain amount of effort and resources, commitment. Resource commitment from staff, resource commitment from your board and community, and time and energy. It's going to take a bit. It's going to take some cash. I think the amount of cash that it would take to do this is probably more than the 10, and maybe not as much as 50, but it's going to be something that we don't have in the pot now. What I actually probably do at the tail end in next fiscal year's budget that we would bring forward in terms of the overall commitment of money to this project. But at the tail end, you're going to have to boost it up in order to finish it out in 09, 010, 010, 11, whatever. But I think the project probably in its life has the money that you can bring forward and then worry about it later, if you will. But it still requires a budget appropriation. But I'm more concerned about the time that's going to take and the energy commitment of staff working with Mintier. And it's not going to be within the existing time frame that we're looking at now. It's going to necessarily boost it out a month or 2 or 3. And I think to the extent that you must look at, under the California Environmental Quality Act, look at your totality of your project. And a separate element that's going to be part of, maybe not a mandatory element, but an optional element. It's a project under CEQA, and it requires review. And if your separate element done at phase 2, looking at Tom's model, might in fact dictate policy that needs to be readdressed in the previously adopted land use element or circulation element. So now you're looking at how do we amend that through this separate body of policy, goals, policy, and action plan. So this is why it's a delicate issue. It needs to be dealt with forthright. It would have been nice to have dealt with it 2 years ago when we were crafting out the work program and contracting the services out. But now that we're doing it midstream, if your board is going to do it, then we've already provided the mechanism, I think, in alternative number 2 at the bottom of page 2, which we say, accept the recommendation of the Business Council, direct the preparation of the economic development element by the county's consultant, Mintier, following the OPR general plan guidelines and incorporating the information provided in the Chapter 12 baseline report, economic analysis, and the draft document provided by the council. I think the council has provided us a good value statement, a good offering of values and goals that are laudable. I think you'll find that many of those are addressed in item 3, issues, opportunities, and vision, that your board has already dealt with. It's been before your board. They'll be further elaborated in the goals and policies under number 5 there,
If you choose not to have a separate element, they will be incorporated through that body. But I think what you have received from the council is valuable. And it's valuable policy input, community input, but it doesn't rise to the level of a general plan element as required by the state and by OPR. It doesn't give us that dynamic mix of goals, policies, and implementation strategy. And so if you're going to do what you may be tempted to do, then I think alternative number 2 gives you that, and we would need direction from there.
All right, I believe there are people who have been wanting to add more input, so I'll allow that at this time, but we'd like to do that briefly.
Very briefly.
And move it back to a board decision. It is 1 o'clock, or is there a little after?
Jim Conklin, the Business Council. I think what we're talking about is a public-private partnership, and to take some of the load off staff and have staff be able to help us in the legalese side of the equation. But we want to help you from a volunteer effort standpoint to be able to create a document that you believe in and can be defensible. So we're offering the time side of the equation, which I think is going to reduce the cost, first of all. Second of all, Mintier has done a baseline report on the economic development aspect of it, so some of the work is already done. So the whole idea of the public and the private working together to create this document just makes an incredible amount of sense. Thirdly, we're going to go to private sector folks and see about the financial side of this. If they're truly public-private partnership, the private possibly puts in money to help address the issue. And then you have a really, truly public-private partnership. So we would urge you to move forward on this separate element and have us help you.
Have you read option number 2, and does anybody in the room have input on that question? No? Nobody's received that? Okay. Any other board comment before we entertain motions?
Well, it's really difficult because it's like having a family of 6 and you only have enough resources to take care of 4 of them. Seems to be a pattern here, but I have to tell you folks that I agree with the principles, or I agree with the philosophies that the community and the organizations have presented with us, but I am strongly against anything that is going to delay or cost overrun the work that we started 2 years ago, and I cannot see how the establishment at this point of another separate element for our general plan could fail to do that. I don't want to seem unappreciative of all the hard work that's been done, and especially to the point where I want anybody to slow down their efforts, but I really think that the best value for the time, effort, and money is going to be to continue this work as we go forward with the general plan as it is designed and committed now, to make sure that the philosophies and the concerns that are addressed in this draft economic element are incorporated into the general plan update that we are now far into the process of trying to complete. We are already over budget. We've already pushed the timeline out. And I am for completion of this in the most efficient and timely manner that we possibly can. So at this point, I have to say that I agree with the recommendation of staff, and I would hope that the community and the organizations that have put their time, effort, and resources into this work will continue to work with the staff and the community to make sure their concerns are addressed in the general plan update as it has and as it will proceed.
All right, well, the matter before us is the question of what direction, if any, to give staff regarding including a economic development element into the general plan update. All right, so I'm looking for a motion regarding what instructions shall be given.
Mr. Chairman, I have a favorite phrase from back in my old construction contracting days is that we always or seldom seem to have time to do it right, but we always have time to do it over again. So I would like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation in item 2. I'm not going to reread that because it's already been read into the record, but I want to include the standalone economic element. I'd like to accept the offer that's been tendered by the Business Council to help partner this effort. I would strongly recommend to you, I know that your group taxes themselves fairly aggressively on your participation. If you could, I think it goes without saying that this is going to cost the county extra money. We need to have some buy-in from you folks on that too. So that's my motion.
Okay, I would ask the maker of the motion before we entertain a second to, there was discussion about two things. One was timelines and community partnership. Do you envision in the making of this motion that the timelines would be extended, kept the same? And what, if any, partnership do you envision? Because this doesn't mention any of that.
Okay, I would like to keep the timelines the same. Keep our feet to the fire. And I don't know how to quantify. Let's take a stab at it. I would think that collectively, if this is going to be a partnership effort, that the community partners should take it a task themselves. I mean, Mr. Conklin, is it reasonable to put a $15,000 price?
Exactly. Well, I don't know what option 2 is, first of all, so I mean, it's very tough.
I'm going to read option 2 here so that people
Please.
can
Yeah,
all hear what we're dealing with. This is alternative number 2 under the staff recommendations and report. Alternative 2, it reads as follows in its current proposal, and that's why I was asking Supervisor Thomas what his position was on things that were not included. But this says, accept the recommendation of the Business Council, direct the preparation of the economic development element by the county's consultant Mentir and Associates following OPR general plan guidelines and incorporating the information provided in the Chapter 12 baseline report, economic analysis, and draft document provided by the council. So it would integrate using the Mentir baseline, integrate that into this. But it is essentially, it appears, and I'll ask staff whether this is their intent, that the process would be entirely accomplished by Mentir in the under the existing recommendation, or do you see some of the burden being filled by other elements?
Well, if you use the water element model that's currently in place, the CCWD is basically provided a kind of a forum for bringing together the other water agencies, and there are regular meetings. There's a work program that's been set forward. There's weekly and bi-weekly meetings of various groups. The consultant attends those and helps coordinate that process, as well as staff, and we're moving towards completion of that. If you use that similar model, you would necessarily involve Mentir in that process to make sure it's moving towards the desirable, that the product is something that can be integrated into the system. So we would need to get a work program from them, and if you want to involve the community, that work program would state in cooperation with local community, we will put X number of meetings together, different types of forums, and move this thing along.
And that's what we've already started to do with the various groups that a number of people mentioned. We've already brought together about 7 or 8 groups. So we'd look forward to working with the staff and Mentir to address this issue. The process is already a little bit down the road.
Are you willing to pay for it like CCWD did?
We're going to explore the idea of bringing money to the table. That's what a true public-private partnership is.
Well, all right. So in framing the motion, it would appear that we would need to add language relating to utilizing community resources in as much as possible.
I think we need to be more definitive, Steve. If we're saying that we want an economic development element, and we want to keep it within the time frame as so stipulated, we don't, one, know that that's possible because Mintier hasn't said it's possible. And two, we have not said how we're going to pay for it. And if, by chance, the private sector decides they don't want to come up with $50,000 to pay for it, because that might be what it is, we have no idea, then where are we?
I think you ought to at least give us the opportunity to explore that.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay.
I'm really trying to get us to a point where we actually have a vote on an actual motion that actually comes before the board and has a second. So I think we've had a pretty robust dialogue here, and it's now time for us to try to do our jobs. So we have an attempt to make a motion by Supervisor Thomas. Would you like to try to complete that and find out whether you have a second?
Okay. Let's go back to this, the second alternative. Accept the recommendation of the Business Council. Direct the preparation of the economic development element by the county's consultant, Mintier and Associates, in conjunction with business. What would you recommend, Steve, with business associates? It gets kind of wordy here about Mintier and Associates in conjunction with other business associates, but that's my intent. Business community groups. Okay, and Mintier and Associates in conjunction with business community input, and following OPR general plan guidelines and incorporating the information provided in Chapter 12 baseline report. Period.
Yeah. We still have not said how we're going to fund it.
That's the motion.
Wait, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
For the purposes of discussion, I will provide a second, and then I have some...
Do we have any amendments that might be proposed?
First off, if this is passed, and it takes obviously 3 votes to do so, I would like to have one addition to it, Russ, if it's all right, and that is that we're passing this and then we're instructing staff to come back with a recommendation as to how to implement it. What the financial costs would be, and et cetera. And then obviously if the board isn't willing to fund it, it isn't going to happen. But we would like to see this happen, in my opinion. This is our intent. But I would like staff to meet with Mintier, come back with an amended scope of work, what the cost of that would be, and then have a discussion with the business community and you know, the board as a whole, and administrative office is watching our checkbook, I hope, and see if the board then wishes to proceed. And I think this is just, I view this as direction to you and to administrative staff to bring back how we would implement this and what the implications are, and then see if there's the votes to do that.
That would appear to be both a second and an amendment. Is
Well,
that a friendly?
no.
Are you accepting that as a friendly?
Well, of course, and I think that brings to the focus the fact that we're not going to meet on the 11th. We'll have this come back on. My proposal would be to have it back on the 18th, and then it would demonstrate the concept of whether this public-private partnership is going to work. Because if it comes back on the 18th with a verification that the timeline can be met and the economic requirements, the costs are within reason, then we can approve it.
All right.
I'm a little confused.
He's confused.
Hold on a second. I just want to try to get clarity here. We have a motion. We have a second. The original motion has been somewhat amended by proposing that we pursue this with instructions to staff to both consult with the community and Mintier, come back with a viable plan to implement it and the costs attached and timelines thereto for finalization before the board. Am I correct?
That's correct. Is that all right with you, Russ?
That's my motion.
Okay,
All right.
my second holds.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Yes. As I said, I'm a little
Supervisor
confused.
Claudino.
Exactly what are we deciding here? Are we deciding that we are in favor, are we approving the economic element as a standalone element, or are we simply saying to bring back more information? We will make that decision in 2 weeks.
We're saying that's the intent of the board if this passes, is the motion. But it has to come back with staff's analysis after meeting with Mintier and others as to what the economic implications are to implement this recommendation. And at that point, the board will have, the final say.
Let me try to put it more simply. We're not buying a pig in a poke, but we're instructing staff to bring a proper pig back before us to approve its worthiness for the fair blue ribbon. So it's our desire to have this happen, and we're asking people in good faith to come back to us with a workable way to make it happen.
And
Yes.
might I ask that the 18th not be the date we bring it back? I will not be there, as well as it's too short of a turnaround time to get me in here to look at it and give us a realistic assessment of time and effort.
Would that make it the 25th?
Yes, it would.
That's fine.
All right, that is acceptable to the maker of the motion and the second. Is there further discussion? We'll now vote. Those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
And abstentions? That passes on a 4-1 vote, and staff has its direction. And by the way, the community has its directions too. Take this time frame seriously, and whatever can be added to the equation, it would be well to add it in a timely fashion. Last word?
Should we be assured that we invite out the meetings with Mintier so that we can have our input at that time? Because maybe the solution will be forthcoming if we be part of that.
The answer is not, actually. What we instructed was that our staff would be meeting with you and coordinating with Mintier and community groups to make a proposal. What the mechanics of that will be is up to our staff, which is now under those instructions.
Why don't you check with staff and see where they are?
Thank you for your patience, everybody, and your input.
I think Jim had a comment to make.
Just that if this means an amendment with the...
We're still in session here, folks.
My point was that if we're going to be amending our contract with Mintier, it may be a little more complicated. We need to revise the contract document.
All right.
And it's not entirely under our control.
So let's make sure we have those implications as well on the 25th. Thank you. We are now adjourned until we, oh wait, no, we are not. We have we have more motions. We have appointments to make. Marita,
What? No, I'm fine.
okay. We're now on item number 7. As soon as Supervisor Tryon returns to his seat. Item 7 is a minute order appointing applicant to complete unexpired term on CSA number 1, Rancho Calaveras. So with the Rancho...
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out to you that we had a person leave the CSA 1 committee, and it's requiring that we replace that person. We have 2 applicants. My recommendation, if you look at the names on here, John Rain has applied to be on the committee. John is certainly qualified to be on the committee. I have a little concern about the fact that Alice, his wife, is chairman of the committee, and so I would prefer that John and Alice not serve concurrently on the committee. However, I'm proposing that instead of John, that we approve Shelley Prater. Shelley, her name should be familiar to you. She works admirably in the CDA department. She's been working hard on the sign, cleaning up the signs in the county. And I've gotten to know Shelley pretty well. We had a CSA meeting during which we were talking about some of these CSA issues at the Rancho Calaveras clubhouse one evening. I realized during that discussion that Shelley was bringing up the fact that she resides on Driver Street, which is one of the controversial streets over there in the area. So she's willing to serve. She's qualified to serve. I would strongly recommend that we approve her participation or approve her involvement in the CSA 1 committee.
Second.
Okay, I have a technical question, which is that we had before us, and in our announcements, we had one name before us. Is it okay to switch over at this time, or do we need to
No, we had two.
We have two.
I think
Okay.
we were both there.
All right, so that's all.
We have to have a filled-out application.
Gotcha.
It's
And we
done.
do.
It's done. All right, I'm sorry. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote. Item number 8 is to appoint a member of the Board of Supervisors to serve as director on the California State Association of Counties Board,
I nominate Marita Callaway.
along with an
Second.
alternate. Wait, we have a person and an alternate, so
Who's the alternate now?
Wes, I
I've been
think.
attending. I don't think I've ever been designated as official alternate, but
Would you like to be the alternate?
certainly.
Okay, then
all right.
the second still holds.
All right, so this motion would appoint Supervisor Callaway to the position and Supervisor Thomas as the alternate. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on a 5-0. Review of correspondence, reports, and various matters of concern. Supervisor Tryon.
I do not have anything to bring before the board, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Claudino.
How would I know? I have nothing to bring before the board.
Supervisor Callaway.
I have Ebbets Pass Property Owners Council meeting Wednesday and the Council of Governments. Tom, you have the Council of Governments also, so you do have something to report tomorrow night.
Depending upon you.
Just going, it's like what
And,
happens.
Amended report now submitted.
and I'll let Steve do Thursday.
All
for
right.
me. Thank you.
And Supervisor Thomas.
Okay, tomorrow, Calaveras leadership class, I'm involved in that, and then just as a reminder, I'm signed up for the harassment training on 1 o'clock on Thursday. I don't know if anybody else is.
Yeah, I think I'm going to make sure all of you guys go because you beat me up. No.
All right, but with that, that concludes my report.
As for me, I have a mental health board meeting today. I have a Area 12 Agency on Aging meeting. I'll be standing in for Supervisor Callaway on the 6th at 10 in the morning down in Mariposa. And on Friday, I have a First 5 Commission meeting at 9:30. I also wanted to mention that quite heroically, the Deputy Sheriff of Nottingham, Leslie Davis, actually survived the first 2 property tax discussions at community meetings in first West Point and then Mountain Ranch. Stood in under heavy fire and actually conveyed a great deal of information. They were productive meetings and people were quite satisfied with it. If she's listening in, I do want to thank you for your courage under fire. And now we move to our CAO.
Normally not loquacious under these circumstances, but seeing Jeannie Boyce in the audience reminds me that we did have a Halloween celebration here on the campus last week, and it was nice to see county employees working together in non-work activities, and the good time was had by all, and that was very nice. But I think the most important thing that came out of the celebrations this week were the hundreds of dollars and thousands of pounds of food collected for the HRC food bank.
Yes.
County employees took time out to remember their neighbors and friends and the friends we don't even know we have who are in need in this community and will be through the holidays and into next year. And I'd like to thank Jeannie and Mike Kriletich at probation for the role they played in getting this off the ground and the outstanding performances by every department and the open-handedness and the giving that they displayed. I'd like to thank every county employee who participated, and I'd like to thank Jeannie and Mike for their leadership.
So what was the best bribe?
Oh, the best bribe came from CalWorks, Supervisor Callaway, and the deciding factor for them were the hip flasks that were provided as part of the bribes. And as we noted during the presentation, had the flasks been filled, we might have been able to retire the trophy. So it was a very nice showing.
Thank you. County Council.
I've been getting a lot of calls from people interested in the mandatory ethics training, primarily the special districts. I've tried to direct people to, that course is widely and fairly easily available online, but apparently there are quite a few people who prefer to do it live and maybe don't have good internet access. So my office, David Sirius, and I will put that training on primarily for special districts, but they'd be first come, first served, but anyone else who needs it and wants it before the end of the year. That'll be on Wednesday, December 10th from 9 to 11 o'clock at the Sequoia Room at CalWorks. Just call my office and get on the list for that.
Thank you. And from our county clerk's office, anything to report? One of these days we'll draw you out on this. All right, that concludes our morning session. And we have a 1:30 study session that is anticipated, but I believe it would be nice, you really wouldn't want us to be studying with no nutrition whatsoever. And we have closed sessions, so we will move to closed session, which will happen concurrently with our lunch for 1/2 hour, and we will convene the study session at 2 o'clock. I hope that message can go out to all. I guess, Jeannie, you're probably in touch with them. All right, please offer our apologies. This was a longer morning than anticipated. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, that's it.
Everything's in council's office.